American insurance nightmares. Insurance companies are scamming you? My father got hospitalized for a week from heart failure. Literally guaranteed death without getting medical help. His lungs were filled with fluid and he was effectively drowning. Insurance decided that the entire stay was completely unwarranted because, according to them, it didn't seem like he was sick enough. They didn't want to cover anything relating to it. While we were eventually successful, it took years to fight. The bill was in the six figures. This is going to be the underlying theme of all of these stories. While at the end it gets sorted out and handled, it takes so much time and effort and probably money to get it sorted. And God forbid you don't say the right thing the first time, or you're going to be bounced between all of these different people who don't know anything about your situation, except what they can read on a little profile screen with notes that you yourself can never actually read to make corrections or clarify anything. My father was a doctor with a pre-existing condition before Obamacare, which meant that the only health insurance he could get was through his state's pool of last resort. It took 30% of his income as he was self-employed and working in a very rural area. He was the only physician in his specialty for 75 miles, and when things got desperate for his patients, it allowed them to pay in piano lessons, vegetables, or whatever instead of cash if they needed to. He had a stroke and collapsed on his bathroom floor, but lived on life support for 4 more days. $350,000 later, including a $70,000 helicopter flight for 30 miles, this man who dedicated his life to medicine and donated all of his organs to science died less than broke because of healthcare costs in this country. Not me, but somebody that I know was diagnosed with cancer in her early 30s. Her oncologist had found cancer cells in her lymph nodes, indicating that it had metastasized, so he ordered a full-body MRI to assess where it had spread to. Her insurance denied it because they said she was too young to be considered at risk, despite her actively having cancer. They did eventually approve it, but not without a lot of pressure from her doctor. Well, this is far less severe than what I'm sure will populate these answers, but a terrific example of the nonsense that is American health insurance. During COVID, I was working for a Hawaii-based organization, but on the East Coast. Someone in my office popped positive for COVID, so everybody in the office went to a testing site to get tested. My claim for the COVID test was denied because I didn't go to one of the approved testing sites for my insurer. All of the approved sites were in Hawaii. At the time, you couldn't travel to Hawaii without proof of a negative COVID test. So, the only way I could get the cost of a COVID test covered was if I went to an approved testing site. But in order to travel to any of the approved testing sites, I needed to show a negative COVID test. My God. Sometimes the insurance people really do seem like that insurance boss from The Incredibles, just kind of ghoulishly looking over this horrible situation and being like, "Well, that couldn't have worked out better for us." Oh, it's horrible. My wife had an emergency surgery for a spontaneous retinal detachment, literally minutes away from going blind. Insurance tried not to pay because she hadn't gotten pre-authorization, and then after that they claimed a spontaneous event was a pre-existing condition. Pre-existing conditions are called medical history in any other country. The whole pre-existing conditions thing is actually illegal in the US now because of the Affordable Care Act. So whenever someone says they want to get rid of Obamacare, they're in part saying they want to go back to being able to make your healthcare based on an internet-y semantic debate about what exactly is a pre-existing condition. My dad is an oncologist, and he says that there's been an uptick in the number of arbitrary denials by insurance companies for claims that should absolutely be covered under the patient's plan. When they're appealed, they often eventually are approved, but the whole process moves so slow, which can be a death sentence given early treatment is critical when dealing with cancer. It almost seems like insurance companies are delaying crap on purpose in the hopes that the patient will die before they have to pay for treatment. And you might think that providers would just push forward with treatment when they're 100% sure it's necessary and just worry about getting insurance to pay later. But that's exactly why insurers require prior authorization, so that even when they're wrong, you can't forge ahead with treatment to save or preserve quality of life, or the insurer won't pay. 2008 went into hospital for ruptured intestine due to Crohn's. Airlifted to Mayo Clinic high on fentanyl for the pain. Spent a month in hospital, came out with no colon and looking like a Holocaust survivor. Then there was the time my wife felt like something was wrong, went into an OB-GYN to check on the baby, and there was no heartbeat at 8 months. They induced labor. We buried our son and received a bill for $110,000 from the Mayo Clinic, which the insurance company had denied. Then received a bill for $20,000 for the induced labor, which the insurance company also denied. Spent 4 months of daily calls with the hospital and insurance company fighting charges all the way down to $12,000. My girlfriend had kidney failure as a child and had been in dialysis for over 15 years. She graduated college and was working as a teacher. She had to stop due to complications with her condition and go on disability. This was prior to Obamacare, so we tried to get coverage from all the insurance companies, since it's impossible for anyone to afford dialysis without insurance. Every single company declined to cover her due to her pre-existing condition. They essentially told her that she was too expensive to live. And then you've got the same people complaining about moochers on the government. Like, if my health problems were taken care of, I could work. But sure, go ahead and blame me for having crappy genetics. I work for a DME company. We exist solely for the shareholders in the hopes of packaging and selling the company to a larger company like Medtronic. Our income is largely, perhaps mostly, based on overbilling Medicare. We waive patient costs all the time on the basis that we still make record profits year over year if Medicare pays their part less than half the time they're asked to. This is happening at scale across the entire healthcare industry. The system is just completely vampiric. Healthcare could be so much cheaper if there wasn't an entire for-profit industry dedicated to exploiting our poorly constructed state health systems. This is all the US healthcare. The corporate world sucks the blood of society. I was on a trip once and my CPAP mask failed. The closest medical supply store wouldn't sell me one without a prescription. I said, "Lady, it's a piece of plastic. I buy them from Amazon for $10 a piece when I'm home." So it was then that I realized that they weren't in the business of selling medical supplies, they were in the business of filing insurance claims. The whole structure of the company is to bill, not to sell. Probably for $50 instead of $10. My surgery to remove ovarian cancer surgically was deemed elective. The type that I had wouldn't respond to chemo or radiation therapies, but since it wasn't going to immediately kill me, it was just because I wanted it, apparently. I had to pay $6,000 out of pocket. The problem is in the vernacular. At least near me, any surgery that you come in for through the outside, meaning not in the ER or already admitted, is considered elective. For example, if somebody comes in through the ER with hand numbness, found to have stenosis in the neck, they get surgery and it's considered urgent. It doesn't need insurance approval. If that same patient comes into our office, we book for surgery. It's considered elective. Makes zero sense. For a personal example, both of my heart ablations were considered elective. Like, yeah, sure, I did that for fun. I'm choosing to ablate my heart. I do peer-to-peer all the time, and the medical staff I have to deal with from the insurance companies are probably the dumbest, lowest IQ staff I ever deal with. Don't even get me started. Trying to explain to one of those donuts why a patient with a benign brain tumor needs yearly MRI screening. Oh, but they had one last year already. It's enough to make me pull my own teeth out. I got hurt at work and suffered an amputation on site with no pain meds. They slowly pulled my toes off with my crushed boot. And my family lost our health insurance at the end of the month because I wasn't working. But it's okay, Cobra was only $2,500. Not as much of a horror story, but more of a how the frick is this the thing, it doesn't make sense kind of story. I had to get a kind of scan. It was actually cheaper to pay out of pocket than go through my insurance. It would have cost me an extra $50, we're talking $250 instead of $300, if I went through my insurance. My daughter was born early and spent 7 weeks in the NICU. When she got out, we got a bill for something like $400,000, and it took months to get to the hospital and an insurance company to sort it out. We have stacks of paperwork showing that everything's been settled, but every so often we get a letter or a call from one of them because they randomly decided that we still owe them $100,000. All of that stress and time when you should have been focused on caring for our baby. Look, I mean, I knew these companies were evil, but somehow I haven't done a video on this topic before and hadn't realized they were downright cartoonish in how awful they are. My God. Americans, please sound off in the comments. Do many of you go through all of this and still think that the healthcare system there is the right way to go? I mean, I'm genuinely interested in seeing what bonuses the system provides outside of those few people who are able to pay top dollar to the elite insurance companies. Please, give me any reason to believe in your system. So, I am diabetic. My doctor wanted Lantus insulin, but insurance wanted another, cheaper insulin that's not as effective, Basaglar. So my doctor doubled the dosage. So my insurance decided to make the dosage 2 times 14 days worth, 2 weeks a month, instead of 30 days worth, so I had to pay the copay twice a month. That meant 28 days a month, and most days except February have more than 28 days, don't you know? I ended up having to ration my insulin, and the copay went from $25 for 14 days to $65 for 14 days in less than 2 years. That meant I had to go to the pharmacy, stand in line, and get refills every 14 days. And that pharmacy ran out a lot, so I had to come back. I can't drive, so I had to walk a mile to CVS down the road for this, and other medicines. I just started buffering a week at the times just so I could deal with this inconsistency. "Well, how come your blood sugar never goes down?" the doctor asked. I told him, and he shook his head, saying this was so common. He tried swapping insulin types or increasing the dosages, but insurance said no. My A1C was like 10. Then I ended up on TRICARE because I married someone in the military. I got Lantus, Trulicity, and boom, my A1C dropped to 6 in less than a year. But I pay nothing out of pocket in TRICARE. No copay, no prescriptions, and no fees. It's like $58 a month from my wife's pension for the both of us. I mean, socialized medicine will work in this country, the companies just don't want it to. When my first wife died, the military officer was my second marriage, you see, her insurance dropped her because she was dead. Then they sent her a $230,000 hospital bill for her last week of life because she was on a ventilator in critical care. No, I don't live in a communal property state, but they sent her to collections and heavily implied legally that I had to pay. Turns out I didn't. So let me repeat this. They sent my dead wife to collections and then lied that I had to pay because she was dead. The bill collectors called me at work, called our son, and called my sister. Not her sister, my sister. I had legal notices and bills for her in my name coming in as late as 8 years after her death. In fact, twice she had summons to go to court, then summons for arrest for failure to appear in court. However, that sheriff had common sense and took her death certificate. He even said he was sorry for bothering me. Frickin' crazy. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? My wife just got her third denial for authorization from United Healthcare for an MRI on her hip that her doctor's been trying to get her for over a year. The first reason they gave is that she didn't submit x-rays, so she submitted x-rays and reapplied. The second reason, she hadn't done the physical therapy before the request, submitted evidence that she had done the PT on and off for 7 years to no improvement, and reapplied. The third reason, they said she needs to have x-rays done first. This AI auto-rejection cruelty is basically par for the course. I had an extremely similar chain with BCBS. I have shoulder issues where I have severe limitations in movement and my shoulders dislocate with a stiff gust of wind. I went to see an orthopedist and they took x-rays. The x-rays were clear and they pretty much immediately knew that it was a cartilage issue, so they rescheduled me for an MRI. I got in for the MRI the next week and had the readings back within 2 weeks. Around the same time, the BCBS sent me a rejection notice that I'd need at least 6 weeks of physical therapy before they'd even consider an MRI. This was after I'd already had the MRI back showing complex labral tearing that physical therapy wouldn't do anything for. You can't frickin' regrow cartilage and they knew that. So literally everyone knew that PT wouldn't do anything, but BCBS for some reason still wanted me to do it. I guess they figure people will get tired of trying. I'm a disabled veteran though, so I was lucky enough to have the VA cover it without having to fight it out with insurance. I hope your wife gets the treatment she needs, and screw insurance. My husband was getting a stem cell transplant to treat his stage 4 lymphoma. The morning of the procedure, the hospital realized we didn't have insurance because he had recently lost or quit his job and ran out of FMLA, and the previous employer had not submitted the paperwork to COBRA. We had to contact them to fax a form, and I had to write a check for $1,600 to cover the previous 2 months of COBRA so his transplant could proceed. If my sister hadn't gone to high school with that transplant coordinator and I didn't have $2,000 in my bank, he would not be here today. I got real sick when I was 7 years old and had an extended hospital stay. Unfortunately, it happened during a brief lapse in my dad's employment history, so we were briefly between insurance. I later found out my parents went bankrupt and my dad had to take on higher-paying jobs he hated in order to pay it off. He eventually worked himself to death, almost literally. He worked so many hours of overtime that he fell asleep at the wheel and drove off the road and crashed into a tree. Worst day of my life. He should have been enjoying his retirement now. Instead, he's been gone for years and my mom still struggles with depression and being a widow. America needs universal healthcare. And yet the media makes out Luigi to be the villain and a remorseless killer. Definitely not as bad as others for sure, but being a T1 diabetic, you're basically at the mercy of medication prices. South Dakota also only has two, if you're not on a corporate plan, health insurance companies which ironically are part of the two health systems in the state, AmITheA and Sanford. My insulin copay seems to change constantly. The real issue that's stuck in my craw is my blood work. I went to a small clinic/hospital to get work done, and I was charged $800 for routine blood work that typically cost me around $30. I called the clinic and asked why it was so expensive. They said it was because the test was taken in the hospital and not the clinic. That's just their policy. This was a while ago, so I'm not entirely sure if it was a policy of the medical side or the insurance side, but since AmITheA is both the healthcare and insurance company, it doesn't matter too much. Months later, I mentioned this to my endocrinologist, who then mentioned Quick Labs. It's an unadvertised blood test that covers everything I need for $75. Of course, this is unadvertised. Anyway, my fellow South Dakota diabetics, ask for AmITheA Quick Labs if your current blood work is ungodly expensive. No appointment necessary at participating facilities. Narrator here. I don't know what the status of Quick Labs will be in the few months between narrating this video and it going to air, but as always, do your research. And if Quick Labs is unadvertised still, I'd be willing to stake my money on that being because of some sort of lobbying or legal action to minimize the presence of actually good and affordable services. Another great thing about America. For my first pregnancy, everything was covered under my plan without issue. For my second, on the same plan, I figured it would be the same, right? Turns out the company decided that they'd only cover office visits and any lab work was not covered in that. No blood work, no ultrasounds, nothing. When I called to get clarification, they were really vague and would just keep repeating, office visits are fully covered. Okay, but what does an office visit include? Office visits are fully covered. I was directed to check my plan, which was just as vague. After paying for everything out of pocket, my child had the audacity to be born 2 months into the new plan year, so he had to start all over with the deductible. The mother of my wife's work friend. Her house outside of Gulfport, Alabama, was flattened by Katrina, and she spent the rest of her life living in hotels and rentals while her home insurance and the government-managed flood insurance argued over whether a storm surge is wind or flood damage. I moved to Georgia and had to apply for Medicaid because my job didn't offer insurance. I got an official letter stating, "You qualify for Medicaid, however, we're not going to give it to you." Since Georgia had refused to participate in the federal Medicaid expansion, I went without insurance for the next 2 years and almost died. I've gone more than 10 years with a rotting wisdom tooth since I haven't been able to afford the extraction. Got denied at my last municipal job, ended up finding another where I would qualify after 6 months probation. I just spent $1.2 grand on a routine annual physical with blood work because I switched insurances 3 months ago due to job loss, and my policy requires 6 months waiting period for anything preventative. Should have read the fine print, but when I went to go look for it, it was a single line item in a 50-page document. My 5 payments of $50 just went to 27 payments of $50. I worked in billing, and you would not believe the amount of patients scammed by Medicare regarding their yearly physical. Yes, it's free, but if you deviate on anything, it's not free, and you're charged for it. So don't tell your doc your knee hurts or you have a hangnail during that visit. Also, check your insurance for colonoscopies. If you do the Cologuard at-home test and it comes back positive, so you have to go in and have an actual colonoscopy, it may not be covered as preventative and you'll get charged. My mum decided to not be alive anymore because she was afraid her condition was going to get our family kicked off our insurance. Great system. My daughter was born prematurely around Christmas, spent 3 weeks in the NICU. After a week and a half, she was downgraded from NICU Level 2 to NICU Level 1. And wouldn't you know it, nothing changed. She was in the same unit in the same bed, she just no longer was on a feeding tube. Insurance counted her downgrade from NICU 2 to NICU 1 as a new admission rather than a continuation of care. Because we'd crossed calendar years, her new admission was subject to a new calendar year of copays, deductibles, and max out-of-pocket expenses. That meant for a single 3 weeks NICU visit, we were charged max copay, max deductible, and max out-of-pocket expenses against 2 years of coverage. We fought it for over a year before the hospital threatened to take it to collections, so we eventually gave up and paid it off. We had a good policy, as the max out-of-pocket for each year was only $4.5 grand, for $9,000 total for an NICU bill that exceeded $350,000. But that extra $4,500 for a second year we knew we shouldn't have been required to pay sure stung. My brother was murdered by United Healthcare. They fought him and denied every single test, treatment, and prescription until it was too late, and he was terminal. When did sheer luck save you from catastrophe? So I would say I was around 10 years old, and my family decides to take the dog for a walk. I decide I want to rollerblade and make big circles around my family as they walk. At one point, I end up a block ahead of my family, and a rusty, beat-up truck pulls up and stops. And a guy jumps out. I remember him having a super short beard. He says, "Hey kid, check this out." And he pulls out a skateboard and rides it on the street and says, "Pretty cool skateboard, huh kid? You want it?" I, being completely happy with my rollerblades, say, "No thank you." He says, "Come on, it's free, just come over here and take it." I said, "No, I like my rollerblades." At this point, he looks down the street and sees my family walking up it. Without saying anything to me, he throws his skateboard in the back, jumps in his truck and drives away. I never thought it was weird, didn't tell my parents, and in my head it was like, some dude just tried to give me a skateboard I didn't want. 10 years later, I'm like, holy frick, thank God I didn't fricking like skateboards. In short, didn't get kidnapped because I thought skateboards suck. Finding out from an auntie from my dad's side that my parents were going to let my mum's sister and husband adopt me as a baby because they were childless for a long time. If the transaction happened, it would have been kept a secret. Thank goodness it never happened. The woman is a nutcase, and the husband ended up divorcing her after they had a son. Their kid grew up whacked and feral, and my parents became his guardian. The poor kid didn't even know how to wipe his butt and had to be spoon-fed at age 10. This one happened to someone else, but it's still interesting. I'm 16 years old, and last year when I was walking home from school, I saw two little kids that couldn't be older than 9 who were walking home a little bit in front of me. I assumed they were brother and sister. Anyway, me being so much bigger with longer legs, I eventually started to catch up to them. And right when I was about to turn off into my street, I noticed a car pull up next to them and ask them to get in. My heart stopped when I heard the older one say, "But mister, we don't know you." After that, I kept walking towards them and screamed out, "Lucy, Mark," because I didn't know their actual names, and they both looked at me. I ran up and said, "Guys, don't run off on me like that. Stay close." I pretended like I didn't see the car pulled up next to them and walked with them until the car drove off. They asked me who I was, but I just kept telling them to be quiet until the man goes away. When the guy left, I told them not to talk to strangers and walked them home. I explained to their parents what happened, and I don't think I've ever seen more grateful parents. Don't talk to strangers, kids. So wait, who are you now? Shut up and do what I tell you to do. Which stranger to trust, the calm ones who park next to you in their car, or the one who runs up screaming and pretending to be your sibling? I'm going to say that the assertiveness of this author probably saved those kids. First, let it be known that I have a gift/curse where people feel like they can tell me their life story. Strangers especially. I rode the city bus from a ghetto part of town to Homelessville, where I had to transfer to home. There were a few regulars, but every now and again there'd be someone new and inevitably they'd sit next to me. I was at the transfer bus stop with 3 other people. An old man who spoke no English, so I'd never spoken to. This twitchy gang dude who had gotten on the first bus a few stops after I did. Then there was a man in a suit. He looked like the love child of a successful black guy and The Rock. He sat next to me and started a conversation. I don't remember exactly what it was, but something about his line of questioning creeped me out. On the surface, it wasn't anything like, "What undies are you wearing, little girl?" And aside from sitting way too close, he didn't try to touch me. Maybe I was just too wary of strangers, but I just didn't want to talk to him, and I hoped he got onto another bus. However, I was raised to be polite and couldn't think of a way to tell this guy to please stop talking to me. Then twitchy gangbanger plops down next to me on my other side, also too close. Now I'm sandwiched between 2 guys, and Twitch was almost leaning over me. He starts talking loud and fast, rambling and mumbling to where I can't understand a word. Creepy guy eventually gets up to go stand next to no English, but I still have Mr. Twitchy. Twitchy then proceeds to tell me his life story. He claimed to be in a well-known gang, and I thought he was saying this to appear tough, though he was flying the right colors. He then talked about his role in the gang and how his dealer ripped him off earlier that day. He was pointing to scars on his arms and face and explaining to me how he got them. My bus came and we all climbed into it. Creeper had basically given up talking to me and sat somewhere near the front of the bus, while Twitch followed me to the back. He wasn't as close as he had been before, so I calmed down ever so slightly. It also helped that I was sitting next to a regular who was blind, so if push came to shove, I could whip Twitch with the cane. He kept up with the constant monologue and didn't stop until Creeper got off the bus. Twitch then says, "Oh, I thought that weirdo was never going to leave," and runs off. Before he does, I hear him asking the driver the quickest route to get back to where we'd been picked up. I went home and using the location and many hours, I found out that Creeper was a convicted, unspeakable act offender. A month later, I also saw a very familiar mugshot in the paper. Twitch was arrested for murder. In short, had a nice talk with a gang member who, it turned out, killed a lot of people. Also, he got on the wrong bus to protect a 16-year-old girl from an unspeakable act offender. Mine was a few months after I'd turned 21. I'm from India and frequently make trips from my house to Bombay, to one in another state around 1,000 kilometers away. It's a 20-hour journey because I prefer buses over trains. I've been doing it for over 15 years and always booked the exact same seat, 4 seats down from the driver on his side. This particular time, though, I booked my ticket late and instead got a seat on the opposite side of the bus. We'd just stopped for dinner, and once done, I got back to my seat and settled down with a book. As soon as we turned back into the highway, there was a thud and a lot of dust and glass flying around. Turns out a truck rammed into the side of the bus. No one was hurt more than a few scratches. However, in my usual seat, there was a lady about 5 feet tall, and there was a huge block of wood that was stuck over her head. If I'd gotten in that seat, I'd have been decapitated. Was quite a what the frick moment and gave me some perspective on life. In short, didn't get my usual seat on the bus, was spared a decapitation. When I was about 7 years old, my twin, an older brother, and I had gone with a family friend to go to his mother's house. This was nothing out of the ordinary, as we'd gone with this man on several such occasions prior. We were living somewhere in Nevada at the time, nearish the California border. He'd asked my parents if it was okay for him to take the 3 of us for a visit, and my parents said yes. I'm not really sure at what time we left, but we never made it to his mother's house. I was looking forward to seeing her cat again. We drove for hours, my brother, sister, and I in the back seat. This man didn't stop to let us out for a bathroom break, and he didn't have anything other than beer for us to drink, and he was drinking as well. After another hour or so of driving, he got pulled over. He told us not to say anything to the officers. They approached his vehicle and could smell the beer coming off him in waves. They noticed us in the back seat and asked if we were his. He, of course, said yes. The officers didn't believe him. Thank God. They asked him to step out of the car and placed him under arrest. He fought them the entire time until they clubbed him into submission, just to get him in the back of the cruiser. Another CHP showed up and took us with him to a foster home, where we stayed until our parents could come to pick us up. It wasn't until 15 years later that I'd learned that the man had pretty awful intentions with the 3 of us. I never thought of the fact that he didn't bring any of my brothers with us. When the officer asked him why that was, he simply replied that the other brother would have talked. In short, kidnapped at 7, forced to drink beer when thirsty, and nearly the victim of God knows what by a drunk man before he was arrested. Let this be a lesson to parents listening. It's not just strange men you have to look out for. Even acquaintances like this can have pretty sinister intentions. Scary stuff. I was born in Boynton Beach, Florida, and spent my first few years in a home that skirted some really rough neighborhoods. Though the houses on my street were mostly low-income and minority families who were just trying to raise their kids, occasionally we'd have some break-ins or gang fights overflow into our community. For a span of a few years, we had a smack-addicted homeless man who would hit our neighborhood for easily pawnable goods to support his habit. The cops always knew it was him and would lock him up for a few months, and then when released, he'd be at it again. I was really young, just under 3 years old, the night he broke into our house for the second time. He woke me up as he was shining a flashlight into my bedroom window looking for an easy way in. And moi, being the headstrong toddler that I was, got up to investigate the policeman's flashlight, as I later told my mum. Apparently, I must have scared the crap out of him when I sleepily greeted him as he came in through our kitchen window, because he abandoned all intention of robbing our home and instead picked me up to rock and soothe me back to sleep, laid me down on our living room couch, and hightailed it through our rear door. I'd forgotten the whole incident completely by the time my mum retold me the story later in life, and initially was freaked out by my 3-year-old description of the scary man with the long fingernails. However, I look back at it now with a level of humility. It could have been someone else, much meaner and a far more tragic situation. This man, who was bottom of the totem pole by most societal standards, an addict, homeless, and with petty theft on his crime list, was still a human being who chose to be gentle with a child. In some ways, it restored my faith in humanity. I was driving down a country road at night. I saw a deer crossing sign and decided to slow down significantly for the upcoming blind corner. Came around the corner going about 20 kilometers per hour as opposed to the 80 posted limit. In the middle of the fricking road is some moron walking and wheeling his bicycle. I stopped about 3 inches shy of hitting him. If I'd been doing 80, I would have had to dig a grave. I like how you go right past, would have had to call the cops or fill out lots of paperwork, right to dig a grave. And you've got to dig quick too. If you spend too much time on the grave, someone will walk by, start asking questions, and, well, now you've got to dig another one. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When I was in kindergarten, a man I didn't even recognize came to walk me home. Being as stupid as I was, I grabbed my bags and went with him. I'm not sure how, but he even knew my name, I think. We chatted and he walked me home, and as I walked through the doors, my parents ran to me. Turned out they were looking for me everywhere thinking I'd been kidnapped. My teacher had told them that I'd left with a man claiming to be a relative. To this day, nobody knows who the man was that walked me home. I was chased by an adult male when I was 7. My mum asked me to deliver some eggs and sugar to a neighbor. Typical upper-class, northeast neighborhood, no crime. After I delivered the goods, I started back home, about a quarter mile. There were no streetlights and it was very dark that night, dark enough that I could barely see anything, when I got to a long bend with bushes on both sides. I just passed a driveway when I heard a loud rustling behind me, so I jumped and looked back at the same time and I saw a large, dark figure emerge from the bushes towards me. I was a fast kid, fastest in my class, fastest in my soccer club, and all I could think of was how dark it was and how if I tripped on something, I was a goner. I could hear a man's grunt and inhales and exhales close behind me. I couldn't hear his feet though, just his breath, and it sounded like he was no more than 5 feet behind me. I kept thinking all I had to do was get within sight of my front yard with all those lights and he would turn back and quit. But when we got that close and we were running in the light, I could feel him pressing harder, and I felt like he was getting closer. I decided to take a shortcut through a hole in a row of bushes that bordered our land. My siblings and I had used the shortcut pretty much every time we walked in that direction, so I knew there was a 2-foot drop to the driveway. I ran and ducked through the hole and into my driveway, and I could hear him crash through the bushes. Didn't hear him fall, and he was still after me. When I got to about 20 feet from my front door, I no longer heard him, which was good because I fumbled with the screen door, and in doing so, I got my pinky finger caught and cut off the last knuckle. I opened the heavy front door, jumped inside, slammed it shut and locked, screamed out for my dad, and didn't notice my finger was missing a knuckle until my mum let me go from a long hug. My dad ran out after the guy with a weapon, but he was gone. My dad came back, fished out the end of my finger and put it in a bag of ice to take to the hospital. But they said it was pointless, no pun intended, to try and reattach it. Forget why exactly. The police took my story, looked around, but aside from the bushes being jacked up and some grass pressed down in an obvious pathway across my yard, there was nothing. A few months later in a neighboring town, there was a boy about my age who went missing while walking from a friend's house late at night. Then another a few months after that. I never heard anything about the fate of those kids, and for all I know, it's not at all related to my being chased. But it erased the idea I tried to believe that maybe some guy was just messing around. A scenario that let me forget the fear of going outside at night. The boys' disappearances also made me very appreciative for life. And fast feet. Sorry for the long story, I haven't really thought about it in a very long time, so retelling it has reminded me I need to talk to my 2 kids about being safe around people. And maybe I should have them come with me to run the track for a few laps. Years ago, I was walking on the sidewalk during one of those silent hill days that San Francisco has sometimes, the entire world filled with fog, every sound muffled. Still on the sidewalk, I turned to cross the street and paused for absolutely no reason with my hand up in front of me, and felt something tingle on my fingertips. Something flat and yellow appeared and then disappeared in front of me in a flash, at hip level, without making a sound. It took me about 10 seconds to realize what I'd just seen was a taxicab streaming by at about 50 miles per hour that had been unable to see the road and had driven onto the sidewalk. The tingle I felt in my fingertips was my hand touching the side of the passenger's side window. In short, I'm the luckiest motherfricker on the planet. See, I've never witnessed one of those pea-super fogs that makes it literally impossible to see the road you're driving on from your car, but I feel like this is more of a driver problem than it is a weather problem. When I was around 9, I went roller skating with my older friends, who were around 12 years old. We had just skated out of our neighborhood area when I realized that I forgot something. So I skated home, which was literally 2 minutes away, got whatever, and headed back. I found out that my 2 friends had crossed the small road while I was gone and had gotten hit by a driver who ran the red light. It was a hit and run. It was especially sad because one was a long-time ballet dancer and she was never able to recover from it. Mum and I were coming home from the mall when I was 10. My mum says that she thinks the car behind us is following us. She makes a series of random turns and the guy is still behind us. She sees a cop car sitting in the parking lot of a grocery store, so she pulls into the parking lot and drives up to the cop. The man then hightails it around us and out of the parking lot, flipping us off as he passes us by. I'm still curious as to why he was following us. When I was about 3 or 4 years old, I was watching TV in the basement with my dad while my mum was out with her friends. We heard the door open upstairs and someone walking around. My dad told me to go upstairs and say hi to my mom, and being lazy, I refused. A few hours later, my mom came home and she asked my dad if he'd moved some of the stuff in our house because it was missing. We'd been robbed. If I hadn't been so lazy, I would have gone upstairs and that guy might have taken me too. He might have also seen that someone was home and fled, but the other option is really scary to think about. I also avoided a confrontation with robbers. When I was in high school, I took courses at the college 40 minutes away, and the pizza joint where I worked was relatively nearby. Sometimes on days when I had a huge gap between class and work, or no work in the afternoon or evening at all, I would go home and take a nap, pretty much completely undressed. One day I had a long gap, but I decided that I needed to go get some new shoes for work, and so I didn't end up going home that day. I got a call from my mum as I was trying on shoes that someone had broken into the house. If I hadn't decided to buy shoes that day, the 2 to 3 men who broke in would have come across me in the back bedroom, a 17-year-old girl sleeping and undressed. Yikes. In short, brought shoes instead of napping at home and avoided confrontation with robbers in my groggy, undressed state. I was four-wheeling with some friends up in the Rocky Mountains last summer. I'm not from the US and this was my first time, so I was just a passenger. Everything was going normally, at least as normal as I think, yelling yee-haw while listening to the Team America soundtrack, when we took a turn a little too sharp and high-centered on the edge of a cliff. It was like slow motion as we slowly crept towards the edge and I decided to put on my seatbelt. The car got stuck on a mound, but wouldn't move backwards. I think the mound was the only thing that slowed us down enough not to go off the cliff. We were literally an inch away from plummeting to our doom while "America, frick yeah!" was blasting through the speakers. We don't let Corey drive anymore. I hope you see this, Corey. You're an awful driver. I was 19 years old, traveling by car alone through some pretty isolated towns. No cell phone, my trip was about 9 hours, and when you drive for that long, you end up driving with the same traffic for a while. There was a truck that had passed me and then slowed down to the point where it passed over and over. I was a little annoyed, but other than that, I didn't think too much of it. When I pulled over into a small gas station, it pulled over behind me, but didn't drive up to a pump. As I stood there while the gas pump ran, I noticed a man in the truck watching me, but didn't return the stare. I went into the shop to pay for my gas. As the cashier was putting my payment through, he looked surprised at something behind me. I turned around and my body felt like it could jump out of my skin. The man from the truck was standing close behind me, close enough to touch me by bowing his head. He didn't move, just stared. I walked around him and went to the restroom. I locked the door to the restroom as well as the stall door. When I opened the door, he was standing there waiting. As I walked to my car, he followed me. I stood by my locked car, keys in hand, looking at the man, who was a few feet behind me, in the reflection of the window. We stood there like that, him staring and me waiting to unlock my door. I was afraid that if I unlocked the door, he'd do something crazy like push me in and take off. What was probably almost a full minute later, he slowly walked around to the front of my car and said, "You be careful out there," before getting back into his truck. I got into my car, locked the door, and waited. He didn't move his truck to pull out until I moved my car. I got ready to pull back onto the highway, waited until a chain of a few big slow logging trucks were about to pass, and then pulled out quickly in front of them, nearly cutting them off, before gunning my poor little car's engine to speeds it had never before been at and has never been since. I hoped that I'd run into the police and get pulled over, but I didn't. This was near a piece of highway where women have gone missing before. In short, possibly could have been a missing woman along a dangerous stretch of road. "You be careful out there," were some of the most chilling words I've ever heard. In middle school, I volunteered to work one period for the school library rather than have study hall. I got along really well with the head librarian. I'd say he was the first adult I thought of as a friend. He was really friendly towards me. A few years later, I came home from college on break and my mum starts asking me questions about him. Turns out, he had been inappropriate with several people at the school. In short, didn't become the victim of the librarian. Now I have self-esteem issues. When I was very young, probably 1 or 2, my biological father hired someone to take out my mother and I so that he could leave the country. We lived in Europe and you couldn't just leave without taking your wife or kids, and he didn't want to pay alimony. Fortunately, my biological father lied to the guy to convince him to do it and said that my mother was awful and that I was a brat. The would-be murderer saw us in a park and decided to warn my mother at a party he knew they'd both be at later on. A few clarifications: this happened between 1989 and 1991 in a country that was still technically a part of the USSR. My mother told me this story and I verified it with relatives independently. If we're all going to be skeptics, then I guess I can never be sure if it actually happened, and I can't trust anyone, but if I have to go through life thinking that, and thinking that my mother lied to me for no reason at all, then I'd rather believe a lie. What was the worst reason a teacher gave you a bad grade? Because he didn't read my paper. It was a university class where a TA was responsible for grading the papers. He was clearly overwhelmed and just reading introductions and grading based on them alone. I had a 2-part introduction that fully addressed the prompt, but as he only read the first part, I got my paper back with a big C at the top. I ended up getting full credit after I challenged the initial grade. My first large college paper, for a pre-Civil War history class, freshman year, came back with a giant red D written on it, with practically no feedback. I was in a writing room and I'd always excelled at essays, so I was sort of shocked. Went to the professor and asked him about the grade and lack of instruction. He sighed, looked down and said, "Westhoff, I don't like you." He went on and on after that with some bullcrap reasons, but apparently the big issue came from the first week of class. He was talking about manifest destiny and said something like, "Now, you have to remember, back in these days, there were about 50 to 100 miles between towns out in the western USA. And I'd raised my hand and said that there was still 50 to 100 miles between towns in the western US. He said I was exaggerating and I told him I wasn't because that's where I grew up. That paper was 40% of our grade. He refused to change the grade or even reread it. I scraped a C+ in that class and I was so freaking proud of that grade, even though it was the worst grade I received in my life. At the end of the semester, I decided to ask him for his grading documentation to see if I could challenge the paper with the school, but he claimed that he'd already thrown it away. I found out later that was bullcrap too, but I didn't press any further. We had weekly spelling tests in my 11th grade English class, which I thought was a bit remedial by that point, and had probably said so in a not completely diplomatic way. The teacher even made you write any words you got wrong 5 times and hand that in to her by the end of the class. I'd typically get perfect scores on them, but one time I got a test back with no actual errors, marked as a 0%. My teacher's explanation was that she saw me talking to someone in our free period before class who ended up doing poorly, and that was my fault because I distracted them from possibly studying. Wrote in Chicago format and lost points. The assignment instructions said to write in Chicago format. To anyone curious, I did try and point this out. I basically still lost points, but they upped the final grade. I have nightmares about getting the wrong footnote format as a former history student. I seem to remember one of my courses using a different format than all of the other courses at my university, and it messing a lot of people up. I did a presentation in biology. The teacher told me she wanted me to do a creative introduction instead of just opening it with the standard, "Today I'll be presenting." So I did. I invented a short story about an old lady going to the supermarket and worked in some early symptoms of Alzheimer's, the topic I was presenting. I was so invested in that character, she had a name and backstory. I even drew up a few comic panels so that everyone could follow along easily. Then, at the end of my presentation, I asked my class which symptoms the old lady in the story had, and hence what stage her Alzheimer's was. I get my grade back and the teacher deducted points for the intro since she told me to do a creative intro, so it wasn't an original idea. What? Like what the heck? I came up with the story, I drew the comic panels, all of that was me. I felt so betrayed. If I hadn't done a creative intro, she would have deducted points, so I did one and she deducted points anyway. And after all that work, still grinds my gears. I was 15 at the time. I was taking a 1-week online class. In the syllabus, the teacher said you must post 6 times throughout the week. So I posted 6 times on Monday, once on Wednesday, and felt I was good to go. I got my grade and comments, and the teacher wrote, "I thought you had some good posts early in the week, but then you stopped posting, so I had to mark you down." I was annoyed by this, but then realized it was the last online course in the program, and frankly, I didn't care. I still graduated, and that certificate is proudly sitting in my junk drawer for all to see. Taking online courses now, and the rule in almost every single class seems to be 1 post and comment on 2 of your classmates' posts. Every week it's the same posts. This topic is really interesting and important. I really learned a lot, especially about, a quote from the lecture slide, then a few responses saying, I really agree. This topic is really important in today's industry. A friend of mine got a -1 for scratching his head. Our teacher said he was faking it. I guess that teacher had too many bad experiences with women who faked head scratches. My 7th grade gym teacher gave me a D because I hardly ever smiled. My life sucked at that time. You seem like an unhappy kid. Let me give you something else to be unhappy about because of it. The beatings will continue until morale improves. I got marked down because the staples weren't in the right spot for my essay, even though I had them top left corner like always. That's when you know the teacher doesn't like you and is literally looking for petty reasons to take points off. Not me, but a 7-year-old student I coached for a public speaking contest. She's a child prodigy, a self-taught fluent English speaker in a country where very few people speak good English. She also has a natural sense of how to structure a speech and gives all of her speeches impromptu instead of memorizing. After she finished her speech, the first response from the judges was, "Do you think you speak better English than us?" Spoiler alert, she does. I spoke to them and none of them were truly fluent. They then gave her the second lowest grade possible. She got a bad grade for being better than the person grading her. What grown adult is freaking threatened by a 7-year-old who specifically has been trained for the task they're judging? I didn't like a movie that was supposed to be the teacher's favorite. She'd do stuff like this all the time to other students as well. Complaints were made, but I graduated before I saw where they led. She gave me a 0 because she didn't think that I'd read the book. She said I would have gotten a 75% if she thought I'd read it. 75% of the test questions right supposedly means I didn't actually do the reading. Still one of those things that tease me off even 10 years later. In the 90s, my family didn't have a computer and I had no access to one. I spent a lot of time on a handwritten assignment for school and the teacher gave me a B, writing as a comment, "I would have given you an A if you had typed it up on a computer." I'm still bitter. My teacher lost my coursework on the bus home. I refused to redo a year's worth of work in 3 weeks and I got taken from an A to a C. Bullcrap. The school sided with him. This happened at my secondary school as well. The teacher won't admit to losing the work and then it becomes you versus them on if you actually submitted it or if they lost it. I've never seen a student win this argument. Seems like if you're going to pull that nasty stunt as a teacher, you should at least never admit that you lost it in the first place, even to the student. Just claim you never received the work. My friend failed French because she had a French accent. The teacher couldn't understand her French because the teacher was American. My friend had spoken French since she was 4. I got points off because of the bad grammar in the quote that I used. The quote was Oppenheimer's, "I am become death, destroyer of worlds." I got a 10 out of 10 on a test, but my teacher took points away from me because she didn't want my classmates to be jealous of my grade. This was English class in a Dutch school, so English is a requirement. I was the only native English speaker in my class, and this was a course for adults only. 4th grade, the day before Thanksgiving break. There was no work to be done, of course, so we had a busy work art assignment. We were all handed graph paper and told to color each of the squares either yellow, orange, red, or brown, and once we finished, we were supposed to cut out corn shapes to make Indian corn decorations. I already thought this was stupid and filling in all of the squares was tedious, so I traced the corn shape on the graph paper and only filled in the squares that would end up as part of the final product. This meant my decorations looked the same as all the others, but I didn't waste time filling in squares that would just get cut away. When the teacher saw what I'd done, she gave me a 50 for skipping work. A spelling test, not graded by the teacher but by the kid next to us. Kid named Anthony decided that all of my words that had letters U and E were switched and marked pretty much every word wrong. They weren't? Like, this was probably in 3rd grade, so my handwriting was chicken scratch, but that was really stupid to me. I was upset since it was the first time I failed something in school. I remember doing tasks in school all the time that required us to switch papers and mark each other. It was a way of saving time for the teacher, of course, but also a way to find out which kids were vindictive little jerks that wanted others to fail. When I was 16, in the middle of doing my GCSEs, my dad got into a serious car accident. He was in intensive care for about 2 months. During that time, we were told he would probably not survive. Thankfully, he pulled through, but in the meantime, I hadn't been doing any coursework or going to school. This happened in January, my exams were in May and June. I managed to do enough revision to pass my exams, but I never managed to finish my coursework for art class. The quality of my work was worth an A, but I hadn't done enough of it. I applied for mitigating circumstances, meaning that if I granted, my work could have been marked on quality rather than quantity. But for whatever reason, the school refused, so I ended up getting a bad grade. That was 10 years ago, and I'm still angry about it. I broke my right arm in the 3rd grade. I write with my right hand. The teacher gave me a bad grade because my writing with my left hand was barely legible. In the 3rd or 4th grade, some girl in my class broke her right arm, and the teacher did the same crap to her. And after the poor girl got upset about it, the teacher compromised by assigning some other girl to do her writing for her. They both had to sit at the very back of the room together, so the one girl could quietly dictate to the other all of her writing needs. Everything from multiple choice stuff to full-on creative writing assignments. And the girl who had to do the writing still had to do her own work and was given no extra time, as far as I know. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I failed a literature exam in college because I answered a question too well. We were supposed to write an essay comparing and contrasting one of the books that we read that semester to a modern concept or ideal. We'd known about this particular question for weeks, so we had plenty of time to prepare. Apparently, it's possible to be too correct, because the response I got was that, though it's clear I didn't plagiarize, none of my thoughts were original and matched too closely with the author's interpretation of the work. I was the only person in my class to not only fail, but to get less than a B. I got no other bad marks on the rest of the exam, either. He failed me based just on that one part. I too got a lowered grade for answering too well. I'd studied and been to all the class sessions, so I knew the material well enough to be very succinct in my answers. Only filled half the blue book instead of BSing the whole thing. He gave me a C only because it was too short. From then on, I went back to skimming the reading and BSing the entire blue book tests. Made A's the rest of the semester. In high school, I used the word lascivious to describe a character in a book, and my teacher didn't know what that word meant. So logically, he took off a point. Me? Miss, you didn't give me a point for this, but it is on the mark scheme. The teacher? I don't agree with the mark scheme, so I didn't give you the mark. For context, this is a standardized test, which is why there is a mark scheme. This is a practice test. We used past papers and hence past mark schemes. Still complete bullcrap, though. By the same standard, if the narrator becomes a teacher, he can mark people down if he doesn't like the standard pens the students are issued. I got an F the first semester in chemistry, and I was really pushing myself to get a better grade for the next semester. I needed a good grade to study what I wanted. Then we heard that another teacher from another school would make the test, but the teachers in our classes would grade it. So I've been doing all in my power, reading everything, written summaries, doing the math, watching documentaries, and I got the final grade, D, and I was very happy with that. Then my teacher takes me aside and tells me that I actually got a way better grade, C could pass as a B, but if he gave me a C it would look bad for him since I got an F on his test the semester before. So I was pretty teed off with that, but he left before I could say anything. It was my last day of school as well. When I was in college, I had a professor walking around collecting a homework assignment that was 10% of our grade. Being the unorganized person that I am, I was digging through all of my folders trying to find which one has it. She walks by me as I'm still looking and meanders toward her podium. Before she even gets to the front of the class, I find it and run it up to her to hand it in. She looks me dead in the eyes and said, "That's late. You got a 0. I called her a string of horrible things. She really was, this was just the final straw, and dropped the course and took it again with an amazing professor the next semester. Didn't happen to me, but a teacher kinda gave everyone in a class bad grades because they ditched her. They all planned to hang out after the last class. I guess she was bitter about it. This would be an A paper from other students, but you can do better. I got a C and no other feedback on how to improve. Area of improvement. Learn that overachieving only leads to more work, no job promotions because you become indispensable at your job, and non-monetary achievement certificates to hang in your cubicle. That teacher did you a favor, to be honest. I wish I was joking. I had a crappy religion professor back in junior high school. She lowered the grade of another student because they'd written in the exam that when Moses got the 10 Commandments, there was lightning when the correct answer was thunderbolts. Serious non-native speaker here. I know the difference between thunder and lightning, but what exactly is a thunderbolt? It's another way of saying a lightning bolt. Not really a correct way, but a way. I had a high school French teacher who failed me on a written test for using pencil. He claimed his eyes only saw pen. My family was outraged and called the dean, and the dean was like, "Oh well, he's getting them ready for standardized tests." My entire family had master's degrees, or more, and were like, "What standard test is in pen? It's always pencil. This is a school." Years later, I had my doctorate, and not one gosh darned test ever was pen only, standardized or otherwise. My paper didn't make her feel happy. It was an analytical writing course designed to teach how to write a thesis. The teacher was one of those super hippie artsy people, and most of the curriculum involved just writing articles she failed to get published. So we had to do this analytical discourse on someone's work, and it was trash, so I picked it apart. I got an F. I went to her saying, "What the frick?" I followed the rubric to the T. Her response, "Oh, well, the paper was good and all, but it didn't make me happy. It was kind of mean, and I don't like mean." I said, "The assignment was to find flaws in the paper. It had countless." And she replied, "Yeah, but it didn't make me happy. You get an F." I went to the chair, and it turns out her father was on the board of directors and she had sued the school several times, so she was bulletproof and got to do whatever she wanted. My grade came because all tasks had room for interpretation, multiple answers, and opinion, but my teacher only accepted his own exact opinion, interpretation, and choice. And I just remembered I had a teacher who gave me a D because he lost one of the 2 papers I gave in for my math exam. I took a low level, the lowest possible, modern literature course in college. The professor was apparently someone people knew. They had us read Dracula, specifically a copy of Dracula that they had edited, or something. I don't remember exactly what the contribution to the specific edition was, but their name was on the copy of a book originally published more than 100 years prior. The professor accepted no original thought, or even really unoriginal thoughts unless they were cribbed directly from them. I made the very basic connection between Dracula and the serpent in the garden. There's a passage in the book that straight up makes this comparison if I remember it right. It was dismissed as unfounded because that's not what the professor had talked about in class. The professor just wanted us to parrot back what he said in class on the test essays. It was a surprise to me that there was more creativity in some of my low-level engineering courses than there were in my low-level literature courses. When you have more open interpretations in math-heavy subjects than in your subjective opinion of literature, there's an English teacher who needs to be fired. Damn tenure. Also, the next story contains Spanish and you're going to have to excuse the narrator's terrible pronunciation. Not a bad grade, but I remember I was so close to being the first person to ever score 100% on my 10th grade Spanish final. The one question I got wrong was, ¿Qué tipo de comida es el pescado? What type of food is fish? The answers were A. El carne, meat, B. La fruta, fruit, C. El pan, bread, D. La verdura, vegetable. I of course picked meat and got it wrong because my teacher insisted that fish isn't meat. She's a Catholic and eats fish on Fridays during Lent. According to her, the correct answer is fruit because fish are sometimes known as the fruit of the sea. What the actual frick? Screw your 99%, senora. She liked my dad, so she gave me a bad grade and called him to go talk to her about it. I thought my design teacher had it in for me as he kept giving me Ds for what I considered pretty good artwork. So to prove it, I had my professional graphic designer father do my homework, another D. Then I had my professional illustrator mother do it the following week, D. When we called him out, he didn't really have an excuse on why he considered professional standard design work only to be worth a D in a grade 10 project, but we enjoyed calling him out in a meeting with the head of the year. I lost 2 points out of 10 on an assignment because a full mark means perfection and only God is perfect, and -1 point is only for instructors and professors. Each point mattered at the time because a full scholarship was on the line depending on our grades through the semester. Just to clarify, I lost 2 points out of 10, which is actually 2% of the whole grade. This was in the United Arab Emirates. I lost several more grades and similar assignments. In one of them, it was questions from a paragraph, so once I asked him and went through the answer step by step logically, he got defensive, accused me of wronging him and that he grades arbitrarily, and left the class. I lost 3 more points after that. I lost the A grade even before the final, and thus lost my chance at the scholarship. Nobody in the administration cared. I still resent him to this day. Essay topic. Was Henry V a hero? I argued he wasn't because crazy risks involved. You're not allowed to make that argument. F. Because I was homeschooled. I was getting my AA at a local community college and was getting my electives to pursue a degree in teaching. Several of our papers required us to write about our classroom experience as children. I got very poor grades on those, and when I asked the professor, she essentially said it was because I had no real classroom experience. Because little boys don't work hard enough to get an A, despite the homework, classwork, and exams being straight A's. I never tried again and coasted from then through graduation 10 years later. I was 7 or 8, in 2nd grade, so early 90s. She said that to me, then said it to my parents at the parent-teacher meeting a few days later when I complained. They complained too, and the school sided with her. The next year, the school put me with the best, most influential teacher I would ever have. Just a beautiful human being. I would even go back to visit her every year until she moved out of state. Miss her like hell. She even wrote me a letter of recommendation for getting into college. A super long shot, but Miss Showman, if you ever see this, I still love you and my whole family still misses you. Handwriting, often when the teacher refuses to let me type it. For the final submission of my graphic design college qualification, the brief was to design branding for a pub or club. I got a B because my concept was too cool. The brief was pretty basic and open-ended. It was basically along the lines of, a brand new night spot has opened in the city. It's a pub during the day and converts to a club after hours. Design and develop a brand to promote this new place in the city. She apparently pictured a sort of dive bar in her head when writing the brief, but it was never made clear. She'd never once mentioned it when looking at the interim development stuff as I worked on it over the month we had to finish it. I could have changed tack at any point, but she never course-corrected me. The sheer mind-fricking bullcrap of that actually knocked me so hard that I didn't even bother pursuing it as a career beyond that course. What are some unexpected ways a potential hire tanked their chance at a job? English is my second language. I moved to the US after college and got an interview for an engineering position at a top aerospace company. I was nailing it, as far as I know, until the hiring manager asked, "How is your relationship with your current manager? Would it upset him if you leave, or would he say good riddance?" I thought good riddance meant something positive, like good luck or best of wishes, so I said she'd say the latter. I didn't get the job. A great example of why no one should be afraid to ask questions in an interview. I once saw a resume that stated they were a valid Victorian. Either they were trying to say they were the top of their class, or that they were a genuine person from 19th century England. Neither of which were true. I recruit for the blue-collar industry, and there was a poor guy where English was second language who kind of struggled to understand me, but we had Samoan and Tongan-speaking staff who were assisting in the recruit process. We were through the interview process, and while pre-employment substance screening via urine sample, I was explaining, in depth I might add, the requirements of the test. Pee in the pot up to here, close the lid and bring to me for the test. When he was taking quite some time to pee in the pot, which can happen if people are a bit nervous or shy, I called out to see if he was okay, which he said, "Yeah, boss." About 10 minutes later, he appears and the pot is wrapped securely in hand towels so as to not be on display. I found this odd, as the amount of samples we do meant that we were so used to handling pee it was second nature. He looked a little sheepish and coy, very telling of someone who perhaps was a little nervous that they might fail. I took the cup from him, with sanitary gloves on of course, and proceeded to unwrap the pot in order to undertake the test. I gagged when I realized he had shoveled his number 2 into the pot, assuming he needed to provide a more solid sample. What possessed him to think we wanted to analyze his brown matter is beyond me. Fair to say we couldn't employ him on that day on that basis. I sent him away after some explanation and he was quite embarrassed. Having saved him all the embarrassment I could, he came back the next week to correctly complete the test after I'd set him up with a colleague and proceeded into a job the very next day. 2 years later, he's one of our most reliable and hard-working staff. As someone who works in their second language, I've made some embarrassing gaffes and mistakes in my life. Some of them make me cringe to this day. However, I've never shuffled my own number 2 into a cup and handed it to my boss, so there's that. Props on him for being able to do it on command, actually. In my job, I've interviewed hundreds of individuals. One that stands out for an entry-level retail position, I called him for an interview and after introductions, brought him up to the break room for the interview itself, as the training room was in use. He was kinda sketchy looking, wearing a beat-up black cap and what looked to be a dirty hoodie. But I didn't think too much of it because A, I did call him on shorter notice, and B, I don't like to judge a candidate solely on how they look. And C, it's retail. What do you expect candidates to look like? I excused myself for 30 seconds to check in on my trainee, and when I came back, the candidate looked a little uncomfortable. Not thinking much of it, we start the interview asking the standard questions about what he's done previously, why he wants to work here, etc. I notice he continues to look uncomfortable and it almost looks as if he's hiding something in his hands. I eventually ask if there's something wrong I can assist with and he comes clean. He explains he has a fistful of candy, jelly beans in this case, and he's not sure what to do with them. I'm a bit gobsmacked and have questions, which I wish I could have asked. Where did he get this candy? Why did he think it was a good idea to eat candy in an interview? What was he going to do with this candy? As I tried to articulate a response, he exclaims, "I know," and proceeds to shove the entire handful into his mouth. And this isn't a couple of jelly beans. This is a massive handful of now sweaty, sticky candies that he has just thrown into his mouth. And he starts chewing and chewing. His hands are stained and he's really working his jaw due to the sheer amount and chewy nature of them. I swear 30 seconds pass before he finally gulps them down and asks calmly, "You were saying?" Needless to say, the interview didn't continue much longer than that, and unfortunately, the candy man did not get a job with us. This is an old professor of mine's story. A long time ago, his department was looking to hire some kind of new junior assistant professor type. That narrowed it down to two highly qualified guys, both fresh out of grad school. They knew they were going to hire one or the other. As a final step of the process, they decided to take both of them out to dinner separately. The first guy was cordial throughout the whole thing and seemed to get along with everybody. Seems just fine. Then at the end of the meal, he picks up his empty plate and licks the whole thing clean. Like, tongue flat against the surface of the plate, covering every inch of it until it's clean, in the middle of a nice restaurant. Then he just sets the plate down like it was the most normal thing in the world. Everyone just stares at him and then awkwardly try to just wrap it up. Afterward, they laugh about it to each other like, what the frick? What a bizarre and unnecessary way to throw away a near clinch on a good job opportunity. So then they take the second guy out. Almost just a formality at this point. Again, everything is fine, he's polite, seems perfectly qualified, seems to know the right things to say. Then at the very end, they ask him if he's had any questions for them. He pauses and thinks for a moment, then goes, "So, what is the student-teacher dating policy?" Afterward, the other professors were sitting around together and one of them goes, "Well, looks like we're hiring the plate licker." Worked in onboarding for a while, basically just putting people that other folks hired through the hiring process. One guy wouldn't answer any of my calls, emails, or text messages. Then, in reply to emails from the hiring manager, said I hadn't attempted to contact him at all. Hiring manager sat 2 desks over from me and had listened to me leaving voicemails for 3 days. Guy promptly lost all chances at the job when he accused me of not doing my job. Opening line of the covering letter of their application. "Today is the day when my worst fears were realized." From there, it was a litany of everything that had ever gone wrong in their life. Sadly, it also seemed like they were the result of consistently bad decisions. I'd have thought that they were just deliberately trying to throw the application, except that it had just so much excruciating detail. It was a lot of effort. Job location: London. Candidate location: Denver. Candidate willing to relocate? No. I'm currently getting sent resumes from foreign nationals, some of whom aren't authorized to work in the US. We're a small firm that does 95% of our work with US Gov entities requiring a security clearance. Candidate arrived in rollerblades, stayed in rollerblades the whole interview. He used the word blade instead of walk or go for the whole interview. Can't tell if I was being punked. He was in his early 20s, resume was good but not great. The whole rollerblades thing wasn't a deal breaker, but it definitely didn't help. He insisted on sitting on the desk rather than on a seat, so his rollerblade feet could just hang. I had to insist a couple of more times throughout the interview for him to reluctantly take a seat, which didn't help either. "Well, you went to college. I studied the blade." It's a good thing the narrator wasn't the one in charge of the hiring process, because this guy seems rad as heck, and if he pulled that last line, I would have hired him for the ironic joy in a heartbeat. When I managed a retail store, it wasn't uncommon for people to bail on job interviews with last-minute or no notice. But there was only ever one person who no-showed the interview and then called the next week asking if they got the job. So, do you guys do substance tests? Yes, we do. For all the substances? Yes. Okay, thank you for your time. And then he got up and left. So it can be a good idea to call and check on your application, but don't call the store, ask for the owner, and see if he's looked at your application 1 hour after you left it with us. This person actually called 3 times throughout the day, and each time we told her, the owner will review your application tonight after we close, as this is the busiest time of year for us. Spring at a greenhouse. Please don't name your resume job crap. We had a guy come in for an interview and he showed up a full 40 minutes prior to his scheduled interview. 1-room office shared by 3 people, so there's no good place for him to wait. I said, you can go to the coffee shop next door and come back at the scheduled time. He said, no, I'll just wait here. I have a phone call to make. He proceeds to have a very loud phone conversation in our 1-room office. When it was finally time for his scheduled interview, he was still on the phone and he actually shushed me and said, I'm on the phone. 10 minutes later, he was ready to be interviewed. Not even sure why we proceeded with that interview, but it was over quickly and his resume was in the recycling bin before the door even closed. Posted this before, but it's always good for a revisit. The applicant said, so, you all do background checks, criminal history for this job, right? Me? Yeah. Okay, so the court messed up, and when you run my background check, it's not going to say statutory, but it was totally just statutory. I work at a hospital on a surgery floor. We had 2-part interviews, one with the unit manager and one with either a nurse or an aide. We have a series of questions to ask based on a survey they fill out at the end of the application. She managed to make her way to me, and this was her response to a question. If you saw a coworker doing something unethical, like stealing from a patient, what would you do? She said, it depends if it was valuable or not. I mean, who hasn't stolen something before? I had to take a personality test for a job once. The test was all questions like agree or disagree. It's okay to take money out of the till sometimes, or everyone steals from the register from time to time. At first, I was all, hell no, that's stealing. But by the end of the questionnaire, I thought maybe it was much more widely accepted than I thought. I was hiring in pharmaceutical sales, and it was a large launch for a to-be newly approved product, so they were hiring about 200 people nationwide. Because of this, first step was a phone screen with us, then a video interview with the hiring manager, before flying candidates out for the final panel interviews, where they would meet with 5 individuals, vice presidents of HR and sales of each region, and sales directors for those territories. Because of this, we were very strict with the interviews and who moved forward, which means it really sucked when a guy went into his final panel interview and started doing magic tricks. Very seriously, he started pulling flowers from his sleeves, and he tried to vanish an interviewer's coffee, but ended up spilling it everywhere instead. In that same round of hiring, we also had an individual who did his video call from his coffee table. He sat on the floor, and he had someone ring his doorbell. From the conversation with the hiring manager, he asked politely if he could go to answer the door in case it was an emergency. She said, sure, no big deal, and the guy stood up, flashing his tighty-whities. She didn't say much about it when he came back, but needless to say, she couldn't stop laughing when she told us about it. In short, don't do magic tricks in your interview unless you're interviewing to be a magician. If you do a video interview, please wear all of your clothes, pants included. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My boyfriend just told me the story of a new bartender they hired who got fired after 1 day. Why? Because she couldn't open a can of beer. One of the places I worked at once fired a new bartender barely 3 hours into his first training shift. Why, you may ask? When the bartender training him sent him for more ice, he didn't return for over 20 minutes. Plus, when he did eventually resurface, he had no ice. The manager got weirded out and checked the cameras. He had spent his time rifling through bags in the staff area until he found a pack of smokes and a lighter, which he then took and went outside for a prolonged smoke break. My favorite part of this whole debacle was when he showed up a month later trying to return his staff uniform and get back the money he paid for it. The first uniform was free. Gotta respect the hustle if nothing else, and I mean it. I'm not sure that employee had any other redeeming features other than his drive to scam the place. doing a text screen phone interview, and you could tell the guy was Googling his heart out every time we asked a question. He'd say, let me think about that for a second. The background ambient noise would cut off and then cut back a second later, and he'd start reading off stuff from the top Google result. I had somebody pull this on me once. It was the most obvious thing in the world. There'd be this huge pause before they'd all of a sudden just start rattling all kinds of facts off. If you actually knew the answer to that level of detail, it wouldn't take 15 to 20 seconds for you to start answering questions. At one point, I brought up the Wikipedia page for the subject on my phone while she answered, and silently followed along with her as she pretty much read it out to me. This was my first phone interview ever, so my boss was sitting with me. Afterwards, he told me that he nearly closed the interview by saying, "Well, you have a good Wikipedia-level understanding of things, but you're not quite what we're looking for." I once called a guy for his scheduled phone interview, and he answered the phone as if he thought I was a telemarketer. He was incredibly rude and asked who I was at least 3 times before understanding I was calling to interview him. After realizing his mistake, he wasn't even apologetic for yelling at me. It was a tense interview, and he did not move forward. I once called a woman for a scheduled phone interview, and her husband answered. It was a landline for better connection. I introduced myself as the individual calling for her interview, but when I asked to speak with the wife, the husband said, "She's dead." I'd just spoken to her the day before the schedule, and I said I was so sorry I hadn't realized and was so sorry for his loss. He didn't sound upset, but kept repeating that she was dead and trying to usher me off the phone. So I said I was so sorry but would cancel her interview and would pull her information from our system so no one would accidentally follow up. I was starting to get the feeling that something wasn't right, but still trying to be respectful when he starts backtracking and asks where I'm calling from again. I told him again what company I was calling from for our scheduled phone interview, and he suddenly says, "Oh, I thought you were a telemarketer. She's right here in the other room," and hands it off. The wife was very angry with her husband. He had been trying to convince me for about 3 to 4 minutes that she had passed away, and it turned into one of the more awkward phone calls I've ever made. It was for other reasons that she didn't move forward, though. Had a guy who reluctantly told me he used to work at an adult store. To try and save him from feeling weird, I told him that my wife has always found it fascinating and would love to work in one. His response? "Well, isn't she a frickin' weirdo?" I'm a lobby guard, so I don't do the interviews. However, I have had interviewers ask me how the interviewee behaved in the lobby while waiting. Most just sit there twiddling their thumbs nervously, but 9 out of 10 times those who ask me questions about the company and the team they're interviewing for are hired, and 10 out of 10 times the people who are genuinely rude to me are never hired. I would have thought that this is common knowledge. Why on earth would you be rude to literally anyone when you're interviewing for a job? Assume that you're making an impression on everyone. I used to be a manager where we did a lot of hiring. I've now probably hired hundreds of people and looked at thousands and thousands of resumes. A lady with an MBA applied. At first glance, she seemed interesting, and then when I googled her school, it was clearly a degree mill with a somewhat similar name to a real university. There was also a guy who told me the only reason he was applying was because he was ordered to by a judge to get a job, because he was years behind on his child support. When asked what the story was on his lengthy employment gap, he also said he'd quit working to avoid paying child support. To top it off, he clearly wasn't qualified for the position and had lied his way into the interview in what I'm guessing was some kind of malicious compliance with the judge's orders. There was also a guy who asked my coworker on a date. During his interview, he didn't get the job or the date. The entire job was doing phone support. She said she didn't like talking on the phone. Then there was the guy who stopped answering my question to tell me that wearing glasses was making my eyes dependent on glasses and I should stop wearing them. There was the fellow whose first question, before we even started, was about our indecent behavior policy. So were his second, third, and fourth questions, including detailed scenarios. I'm not sure if he was doing that for a sick joke, but either way, it wasn't great. Our male receptionist welcomed another one and escorted him to the interview room, where I was sitting. He asked if we were waiting for the receptionist to return and asked if I could make him a coffee while we waited. I explained that I was the hiring manager and he laughed at how funny it would be to have a female boss because it was so unexpected. And finally, when we started on the tech questions, this lady said she didn't know how to use a computer and wasn't going to learn because they were too complicated. She wasn't that old, maybe mid-40s, and it was only about 10 years ago. I have no idea how she made it in the world. I imagine that someone who works in mass hiring positions would basically be able to create a menagerie or circus of some of the individuals who they talk to. This lot would be a great start, and they'd be getting jobs. Win-win! I work in software development. As part of the interview process at my company, our candidates interview over Skype using a code-sharing website for them to complete a small and relatively simple problem to help weed out candidates who are dishonest on their resumes. In one of my interviews, I started with the usual introduction of myself, my role within the company, so on and so forth. I introduce her to the task and explain that it'll be on a code-sharing website and that she'll need to follow the link I'll send her to access it. I paste the link into the text window and explain to her how to access it. Some people haven't used Skype before and don't know how to access text chat in a video call. She smiles and nods and asks me when I'm done, "Will you be writing the link on the whiteboard?" What whiteboard? I look behind me and remember that yes, there is a small whiteboard behind me, and this woman was expecting me to handwrite the not-so-short link and she would read it off the webcam and type it into her browser. "No," I explain, "I sent you the link within Skype itself. If you'll just click..." I'm forced to trail off as she reaches forward and picks up her webcam, which I'm assuming was mounted on the top of her monitor. I get a nice close-up of her eye as she peers inside the camera, then turns it on its side to observe it some more. I ask her what she's doing. "Trying to find the link," she replies. Dumbfounded, I once again explain that the link was sent over Skype and wouldn't appear behind me nor on the webcam. She resumes the smile and nod routine as I ask her to follow my directions to access the Skype text chat window. I ask her to wave her mouse cursor over my face until she sees some buttons appear. She takes her hand off the mouse, raises it, and waves it over the screen. I explain to her again that she needs to use the mouse, and she smiles and nods again. After about 15 minutes of a 30-minute interview, she did finally discover the link in the Skype text chat, but she proceeded to type it into her browser by hand. She did not make it to the next round. On the inverse of some of these other posts, I went into a job interview where the manager said, "Look, I don't really care, you're my 30th applicant in a week and everyone has failed the substance test. If you can pass the substance test, you're hired. I don't even care about anything else anymore." I passed. It was an awesome job and he was a great manager. I was doing a video interview with a candidate in a new office we were opening in another country. For background, it was a tech company, so we were a bit informal and I was wearing a company-printed t-shirt so you could easily see I have tattoos. This candidate calls in a few minutes late, but I give him the benefit of the doubt on that. We start talking and discussing the role when I hear his doorbell ring. He gets up immediately, yelling back to his computer that he'll be just a moment. I can hear him let the dishwasher repair person in, be guided to the kitchen and told all about the problems with said dishwasher. I sit there entirely dumbfounded but decide to continue the interview out of sheer curiosity. The candidate came back about 5 minutes later, answers some more of my questions, and then I asked what questions he has about the role so I could wrap this up. Apparently, this is what he was waiting for. "It's so cool that you've got tattoos. Did you do them yourself?" "No. Do you have any role-related questions?" "Well, I've done them all myself. Let me show you." The candidate proceeded to take off his shirt and point out each of his tattoos, telling me his age for each one. He even pulled his pant legs up to his thigh to show what he'd done on his legs. I was dumbfounded. He offered to send me his portfolio. He did not get the job. What's the worst thing you've been wrongfully accused of? Stealing money from work. My register was over $100 short one day. My boss made me undo all of my pockets and went through my backpack. I had to take off my shoes and socks in front of him. He had me shake out my clothes in front of him. It wasn't like he made me take them off, but in the middle of the kitchen he starts yelling at me to shake out my shirt and my undies in front of the whole class. He wanted to see my car, but I insisted that I hadn't left the restaurant. It just sucked. I was humiliated. I'd worked there for years without a single incident. I wouldn't say I was friends with the boss, but we were certainly friendly and on great terms. I get that he needed to check everything out in case something happened, but throwing all of my stuff out of my purse onto the ground and yelling for me to shake out my clothes wasn't necessary. A former friend worked as a barback at a family-owned pub, and money started disappearing during his shifts. The owner saw that on the days money went missing, he was the only one consistently scheduled. They approached him about the money and asked if he was having financial trouble. He denied taking the money. The owners were convinced that he was the thief and started treating him like crap, rescheduling him at the last minute, cutting his hours and giving him crap jobs. They complained about him to the other employees and to the regulars. They decided to put cameras behind the register to catch him in the act and told no one. The next time money went missing, they checked the footage only to find out that their daughter and her girlfriend were the ones stealing. They had the run of the pub, so seeing them come in on their days off wasn't unusual. They set him up. The messed up thing is they fired him anyway because they were embarrassed by all the crap talking they did and wanted to keep quiet about their daughter's theft. I was accused of mistreating a minor by a neighbor. I'd been babysitting my sister. I was 22 at the time, she was 3, and she was going through that silly phase most young children go through where they just want to run around in the buck all the time. My neighbor knocked on the door while I was cooking dinner. My sister streaked to the door and opened it before I could get there. The neighbor saw a buck-wild young kid and a grown man, assumed the worst, and called the cops and then called the other neighbors. The cops came out, talked to me, talked to my sister, called our mum and talked to her, talked to the neighbor. They realized nothing was going on and apologized for the inconvenience and left. Unfortunately, by then, the neighbor had spread the rumor throughout the apartment complex and people being people believed the worst. I became a pariah in that neighborhood. Over the next few weeks, the rumor spread throughout the town. It ended up making my life hell there, and I had to move to a different county to leave the rumors behind. I know a lot of parents with kids who seem to go through this stage. It's generally treated more with amusement than concern, but it can make for some awkward situations when your toddler decides it's time for a public display. Doesn't usually go this badly, though. Another story with similar wild accusations to follow. I was essentially accused of inappropriate behavior as a pre-kindergarten teacher. They always questioned me if I'd have to be in the room with the children alone. I was the opener, so I had 5 to 10 kids in the mornings before anyone else got there, even though it was literally part of my job. Parents would subtly try to ask me this kind of stuff or accuse, "You're the only one here in the mornings. Shouldn't there be a woman with you?" Just stuff like this says they don't trust me with their children. Not as bad as some people here, but it still hurts when all I wanted to do was teach children and help them learn. That's why, as a male, I'd never get into any kind of child-related care where I was the only one with them. I remember when I used to play ball at the park with my dog. I'd bring a bucket of balls and a bat and hit them off for him to retrieve. One day, a kid, about 7 or 8, comes over and asks to play with us. Me, being the friendly guy I am, says sure and hit him some ground balls. Next thing I know, this lady, his mom I'm sure, comes running over screaming at me about stealing her child or something. I was so embarrassed and it made me assess situations so that I won't be alone with any children, because apparently all guys out alone are sick freaks. On Christmas Eve, I was accused of stealing a customer's credit card after I left work for the night. It felt horrible for my team to have to deal with that on Christmas Eve of all days. The lady had come in to return an item earlier in the day. It was one of our Christmas special items that we don't normally stock. I told her this as she was still undecided about returning it. She went out to talk to her husband who was sitting in the car outside. Eventually, she decided to return it. I processed the return like normal. I didn't touch her card at any time. She put her card through the FPOS terminal. I had her sign a receipt to say that she had returned the item. I gave her a return receipt which shows FPOS refund on it. And that was that. Later that night, after I'd left, the husband came back. He was furious. The lady was with him, but she was quiet. He was yelling and throwing a massive tantrum, saying that the girl who served her, me, had stolen her credit card. He was demanding an apology from me or my team. Luckily, we have security cameras which face directly on the counter. They're very clear pictures. It was very, very obvious that the wife put her credit card back in her purse. Plus, a receipt will not be printed out if a card is still in the terminal, which meant she wouldn't have been able to sign anything if she had left it in there. The manager was not happy about him accusing me of this. He didn't get his apology. This reminds me of an incident involving myself a while back. I'd gone through a drive-thru, ordered food, and paid. I was on autopilot at the time. I received my drinks through the window and couldn't figure out where my credit card went. I informed the girl in the window and she checked her workspace while I dug through my car. She apologized for the incident and the manager gave me a card with her name and number to reach them if I couldn't find my card. Well, I stopped in the parking lot for a bit, searched some more, and decided to head home. On the drive home, I got a call from a man that told me he had reviewed their security camera and she had given me my card back. Before I could thank him for checking, he insisted the clerk did not steal the credit card. I never made that claim, and it surprised me how defensive he was over the issue. He told me I could come to review the footage myself at a later date if I didn't believe him. When I got home, I went through the sides of the seats, under the seats, etc. until I did find my card. What happened is, when she handed me the drinks, she stuck my card between them, and the card fell down the side of the center console. I didn't realize this at the time. I called them back to let them know I found my card just because of the potential drama I'd caused, even though I was calm and unaccusingly polite throughout the ordeal. It was pretty silly to begin with. I realize now this might happen more often than I'd think, and people are stupid and easy to accuse. Stabbing a kid with a pair of scissors. I tried to explain the kid was bullying and attempted to steal my scissors but cut himself on them in the process. Got suspended by the principal anyway because the school didn't want to take sides. I was 18 and home for my lunch break one day, when 3 detectives showed up at my door. Apparently our IP address had been used to post illegal material containing children to a website. Not knowing my rights adequately at the time, I let the cops in and let them inspect my computer. They found LimeWire on it and decided I was a suspect. By this time, I'd called both of my parents at least 10 times, but neither were picking up. I let them take my computer so they could have the lab do a more thorough inspection of my hard drive. Expectedly, they found nothing and either decided not to or were unable to get a warrant for the rest of the computers and digital storage devices in the house. The worst thing about the whole ordeal was my parents asking me repeatedly over the next week if I did it, and if I did, they'd get me help. That freaking hurt. I'm already freaking the frick out about cops taking my computer and digging through it, and now my parents think I'm guilty. They didn't seem to accept that I didn't do anything wrong until we got my computer back and we were no longer being investigated. My plan after the fact was to not tell anyone about what happened, because nobody needs to know that the cops came knocking on my door looking for someone distributing that kind of material. My dad decided to tell any of my friends who came over about what happened as a warning about security. Our Wi-Fi was unsecured until after this incident. Being 18-year-old dudes, they made it a running joke that I was into that stuff. They're still my friends because I know they weren't trying to actually be jerks, but those jokes still hurt. They actually mostly stopped after a couple of months, and I think the last time I heard one of them mention it was 2 years after the fact, 4 years ago. Oosh, I mean, there's a lot of accusations in this group about misbehavior with young people. I guess it's a good thing that people take the issues so seriously, but it looks like it can really wreck your life if untrue accusations come your way. My mum accused me of eating her candy bar when I was 8, even though my sister ate it. My sister was 10 and wouldn't fess up, so we had to stand in a corner for 6 hours until my dad came home and I started bawling and my sister finally told him she ate it. He yelled at my mum for punishing me. Love you, Dad. 6 hours for a candy bar? Jesus Christ. Yeah, my mum is serious about her chocolate, and she's a witch. My wife was arrested while out shopping with our 3-month-old. As she walked into the store, a girl who was exiting offered her a shopping cart. My wife accepted and went about her business. A few minutes later, the girl found her in the store and asked if she'd left her, the girl's, wallet in the cart. My wife said no and figured that was the end of it. Evidently after that, the girl went to store security who let her watch all the recorded security video and they saw my wife tucking something into her diaper bag right after accepting the cart. It was her phone, by the way. The girl ran back across the store, screaming at my wife, "I know you did it! They have it on camera! I called the cops!" etc. So my wife keeps trying to de-escalate the situation, but the girl's having none of it. Then the store's customer service desk, where they ended up to discuss things, holds up the girl's wallet. "Is this yours?" The girl grabs it and confirms it's hers and departs without an apology. Then the cops show up and in their opinion, my wife stole the wallet and hid it in the store where someone else picked it up and turned it in. So they arrest her for felony theft. After trying to force her at length to confess, threatening our child, swearing at her, among other things, eventually she pulled out her camera to record them and that's when they shut up, cuffed her and charged her. It took us several months and a hefty lawyer fee to get access to the security video, which the cops weren't required to turn over to us until the day of her hearing. But once we had it, it only took 20 minutes to prove exactly what did happen with the wallet. It was dropped by the girl before she even offered the cart. Another customer picked it up and brought it to customer service before my wife even entered the store. 5 months, $3,500 later, the DA called it a case of mistaken identity and dropped charges. During that time, my wife couldn't apply for jobs. She's a mental health counselor and it would have shown up in her background check, and had to take several days away from our very young child, including being detained for over 4 hours for the arrest itself. No apology from the DA, the cops, the store, or the girl. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When I was 18 years old, my cousin came over one day and brought me truck parts that he said he'd brought for my birthday and they'd finally arrived. I thanked him wholeheartedly because it must have been almost $1,000 in parts and I really needed them. I installed them all into my truck and went on my merry way. Fast forward about a month later and I'm cleaning my truck and 2 police cars roll up to my house. They read me my rights and explain to me that my cousin told them that I told him to steal a credit card and buy me truck parts, which is a screwing load of nonsense. I told them that I had no part involved with it, and that should be the end of it. But still, I did receive stolen products and still had to go to court for it. My cousin got a slap on the wrist and community service because he was 17, but since I was an adult, I had to be charged. I was able to get it down to only a misdemeanor and no jail time, again, all while I never did a single fricking thing. Dealt with it on my record for about 2 years and was able to get it expunged. F the American justice system. I was able to forgive him because I know we all make mistakes, but what really killed me is that his mother, my aunt, said I was a bad influence on him and I deserved it. That hurt me the most. The school district was hit by a virus. I think it was ransomware, although that doesn't match up chronologically, back in late 2007. Once they cleaned up the mess, they traced it back to someone with a flash drive in our computer lab, during the period our class was using them. My 5th grade teacher, who had it in for me, ranted me out in front of the class regarding my utter stupidity and carelessness. That hurt, although she'd done it before and would do it again. I wasn't to blame, however, as I'd lost my flash drive a couple of weeks before the virus incident, and ended up finding it a month or so in a small backpack pocket, completely soaking in a carton of soy milk I'd also forgotten. Oddly, no other consequences, which makes me think she was bullcrapping. I was accused of unwanted advances on a girl at a party at my university. I was drunk as heck that night, and so was my good friend who I was dancing with. This girl had a boyfriend who I knew of, so I wasn't even hitting on her, we were just drunk and dancing. Suddenly, one of the guards grabs me by the arm and kicks me out and tells me that one of the stage guards had called him due to me bothering this girl. I spoke to her the day after and she had no idea what they were talking about. The worst part about this was I actually knew the guy who kicked me out. He told me to go grab something to eat at McDonald's and come back in an hour or two, since I was really drunk, which I can own up to. I assume he knew me well enough to know I would never do what I was accused of, but it still ruined that night. Back when my school's Twitter started posting raunchy SpongeBob memes, my teacher accused me of hacking into the Twitter account and doing it myself. He probably thought so because I've done sorta similar things before, but not to that extent, and nothing that could be considered hacking. They eventually figured out that the student responsible for running the account mixed up the school's account and one of her personal ones. The narrator has said dozens of times throughout his life that adult images of SpongeBob are no laughing matter, and feels vindicated by the previous story. Think before you Photoshop off those square pants, people. I was accused of stealing a puppy. This'll be long. My boyfriend, now husband, and I were home one Friday afternoon when our dog started barking incessantly, which is unusual for him. I go outside and there's a Labrador puppy playing around in our front yard. No one is around. I've lost a dog before and know how that feels, so the first thing I do is put him on a leash and walk him around our neighborhood to see if we run into anyone looking for him. No dice. It's getting late in the day and I have to start getting ready for work. I tie him out in our front yard so if anyone's looking for him, they can spot him and then call the animal shelter to report him found. But I don't initially bring him in. In 2009, I lost a blue heeler. While frantically searching for him in multiple counties, I emailed a lady who I thought was the current director of a local animal shelter. She had since left the position and was very candid with me about the shady things that sometimes go down in animal shelters. I'd heard some stories about possibly unethical practices being carried out at my own county shelter, and took her advice to heart. So I was wary of dropping this puppy off at this shelter even though I'd since moved to a different county. My boyfriend was sick that weekend and was not in the mood to watch this 4-month-old puppy in our unpuppy-proofed house. I didn't want to take him to the shelter. I felt confident that we could find the puppy's family, but I was scheduled to work the next 3 days and had very little say in the matter, since I wouldn't be able to actually watch the puppy. My boyfriend drove him to the shelter that evening. He signed a paper relinquishing the pup, but didn't get a copy. The next Friday, I have a voicemail from the owner of the puppy saying that the shelter had given her my number. She wants to pick her puppy up. What in the heck? I call her back and tell her that I'd found her puppy and alerted them that he'd been found and then taken in. She didn't believe me. Fast forward, she starts talking about legal action. She's accusing me of theft of her very expensive and well-bred Labrador. I didn't let on that I know labs and that she didn't have much of a pup from a conformation standpoint, but I digress and not that it matters. I keep my cool. I've never so much as smoked a cigarette in my life, so I wasn't feeling very intimidated. So I'm at work again, and I'm complaining to my coworkers about this predicament that I'm in. The shelter is acting like they've never heard from us. This woman filed a police report against me. I show my coworker a picture that I'd taken of the puppy. Her friend adopted it 3 days after it was turned in. So now I found the puppy twice. I call the original owners and I'm like, look, this is weird and I don't care if you believe me, but I found your freaking puppy again. The shelter adopted him out way before the standard stray hold had expired and without being altered. I connect her to the new adoptive owner who is crushed when he hears the backstory. The original owner goes to the shelter for answers about how this could have happened and decides to believe me when, due to the system being down, they can't show her any of the paperwork for the dog being relinquished or adopted out. She believes me now, but instead of all three of us, me, new owner, and old owner, going up there and exposing the lies once and for all, she wants to sue their butts off. She doesn't get her dog back for weeks because it's evidence or some crap, and I'm not supposed to confront the shelter until she says so. I have 2 lawyers in my family who say this suit won't go anywhere, and it doesn't, to my knowledge. I never got any closure. All I want for them is to look me in the eye and admit to throwing me under the bus. A day or 2 after the truth came out and the original dog owner had begun her crusade against the shelter, reporting them to the news, reporting them to the county commission, etc., the county dog warden creeped by my house at about 9 p.m. I'm instantly suspicious. Next night, same thing, but my dog and I are out for a walk on my street. The next morning I get a knock on my door from an official-looking man asking if the dog in the yard is mine. Apparently a dog that looked like him bit someone, but this guy is so nervous and he's stuttering that he can barely get the words out. I look him in the eye and tell him that my dog is never loose or out of my sight and to get off my porch. He said my dog matched the description they had. Well, the interesting thing is that my next-door neighbor has the exact same breed, same color, and everything. Do you think they asked her if her dog had bit anyone? Negative. Same investigation. I'm glad I told him to get lost. After that, I took my dog for a vacation at my dad's farm. I'm convinced the shelter wanted some petty revenge. This was 4 years ago, but screw you, Dana and Mike. In 3rd grade, there was this one kid and we hated each other. One day, I get accused of calling him the N-word during recess. The only problem was I was on the other side of the playground from him. Come lunchtime, the teacher pulls me aside and starts scolding me and demanding that I apologize to him for calling him that. I refused to because I didn't, and I didn't even see him all day. She then gets on me for claiming he was lying, and it's wrong to accuse someone of lying, and that I had to apologize for both now. I refused and said I didn't say anything, and I refused to apologize for something I didn't do. Finally, she says if I didn't do it, to just apologize for it. I replied saying that if I apologized for doing something I didn't do, then it would look like I actually did it and be wrong. I refused, stood my ground, and got a week of lunchtime detention. Totally worth it. That sucks, although I'll be the first to admit that I'd have no idea what to do in a situation like that where you have no proof one way or the other as to who said what. I'm glad I'm not a teacher. Not sure which of my bad luck Brian stories to share here, so let's go with one of my personal favorites that had the biggest risk of jail time. It was about 10 to 15 years ago, and I'd recently graduated college and finally had the money to go and drink. Friends and I would go out and listen to cover bands and drink and have a good old time. However, because we weren't stupid, we would auto-rotate through the designated driver through the night. This night, it was my time to be said driver. I picked up the guys and we all go downtown and get into the parking garage. It's one of those take a ticket, gate opens, pay before you leave situations. We're at the bar, having a good old time, drinks are had, well, not by me, and many advances on women are rejected and we call it a night. Get to the car and go back to the gate and put in the ticket. Ticket spits back out, put in the ticket, ticket spits back out. I look over the ticket and it appears to be in working order, no major fold on said ticket and everything looks fine. I try this 4 or 5 more times before pressing the call button, but this just rings a phone and nothing happens. At this juncture, I'm livid. I just want to get the heck home. And this is a time before Uber and a town where taxi service is craptastic at best. Sure, I could walk 5 miles home, but I don't want to. So I try the ticket again. Finally, Chris has had enough. He gets out of my car and starts screaming obscenities till he's red in the face. He goes to the gate and just lifts it up. You can hear it break. At this point, nothing I can do but just drive on home. Well, those garages have cameras. Those cameras look at the license plates, and those license plates tie back to your name. So imagine my shock when I get a call from the police department the next day saying they want to question me regarding property damage in excess of some crazy number. Well, in the end, Chris admitted he did it. He had to pay for the repairs and do some community service. But man, that sucked. What's the most spectacular way you've seen someone screw up at work? A grad student was invited into a professor's office for a meeting and was left alone for a moment. There was a pile of cumulative exams on the professor's desk that had just been graded. These are subject exams for grad students. Wickedly difficult, and you need to pass 4 to continue in the program. This moron decided he'd take a look at the stack of exams, then upon finding that some of his fellow students did poorly, he took pictures of their grades so he could use them to ridicule them and pass the results around the department. This was a big deal because numerical grades aren't ever given out for these exams, only pass and fail. And also, it's a pretty big FERPA violation to distribute others' personal academic information like that. FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. He was found out almost as soon as he sent the pics around and was dismissed and forbidden from campus immediately. Someone else had to pack up his desk because they were that serious about him never setting foot in the building again. Good frickin' riddance. I'm so thankful none of my classmates in my grad program were this petty and cruel. It's hard enough with everyone being supportive and awesome. The sheer idiocy of that dude is breathtaking. A coworker received a promotion and a large raise. They were told they should thank the CEO as he initiated the entire promotion. My coworker went on a rant about not asking for any of it, so he's not thanking anyone, and it escalated from there. By the end of the day, he was fired. My coworker actually turned a promotion into a termination. One of my coworkers at a grocery store accidentally locked the only master key set into the security office, then attempted to break the door down with a claw hammer before anyone could find out. 10 minutes of furious attacking only succeeded in attracting the attention of everyone in the store, breaking off the handle and bending the entire lock, making it inoperable by the locksmith brought in later. Guy drops a glove in the deep fryer, sticks his entire hand in before realizing it's on and set to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Oops, I dropped the thing that's meant to protect my hand in that hot oil. Better stick my hand into said hot oil to fish it out. Oh no, there's hot oil on my hand. Who could have foreseen this turn of events? The author continues with another story. My current job is a lab technician at a major university, and we had a new guy unplug the small -80 degrees Celsius freezer full of recombinant DNA because he wanted to charge his phone. Oh, yikes. I remember when I worked as a lab tech and another tech overfilled some of the wells in our stock DNA sample tray, contaminating all of the other wells. Then she just wiped off the excess and didn't tell anybody. Not only did we have to travel several hours to another university to get new DNA samples, but we had to throw out several weeks' worth of work since we'd unknowingly been using contaminated samples. I was once a bank teller. One day, a guy comes in to pay off a line of credit that he shares with his son. Apparently, his son is a substance addict and ran a line of credit up to $10,000, maxing it out. The guy comes in, talks to my fellow teller, pays it off, and signs to close it out. He asked my coworker at least 3 times that it was closed. She assures him that it is. She's also addicted to her phone and loans most of her attention to it, by the way. The guy leaves. Several months later, the same guy comes in enraged with a line of credit bill. He comes to my window and explains the situation. He thought it was closed. It turns out that our bank's policy, not sure if this is universal, is that both he and his son have to sign off to close it out, unless there's some sort of special circumstance that never happened. The guy owed another $10,000 because of course his son isn't going to sign off on closing it out if he can run up the balance again. Dad says he's going to sue. I point him in the direction of someone more qualified than me. My manager tells me he has a good case and will probably beat out our corporate bank in court. I'm just a teller. Some days it's good to be on the bottom. Glad it wasn't me that messed it up. I work at a call center. I reviewed a call where the guy thought the phone was muted and called the customer a stupid moron. The customer called him out and he tried to backpedal and make up some story. He was fired shortly after. When I worked at a call center, this was a regular occurrence. I used to work at Popeyes, this fried chicken chain. It sucked and I eventually quit. A week after I quit, the night crew decided they didn't feel like putting the boxes away from a truck shipment. Someone could deal with it next day. Few days later, and several reports of food poisoning later, they got in a load of trouble. Boxes were full of raw chicken. I'm so glad that I quit. A couple of years ago, we had a new supervisor directly from corporate. He got a promotion and moved from another city. He was a complete jerk, micromanagement nightmare, arrogant, a few other things. But someone up in the corporate ladder really liked the guy, so he had full support from the bosses. Then in his first month of work, his company car was stolen. It was insured, so no big deal. A week later, his replacement car was stolen again, and a third car 2 weeks later. Turns out the guy had trouble with alcohol, and he got really drunk and left the car open on the street and just forgot about it. He wasn't fired, he was just moved to a desk job with no company car. I used to work in a grocery store, and I had an HR person repeatedly lose my doctor's note stating that I have Raynaud's syndrome and couldn't be in the freezer. I got a stack of them from the doc and would have to bring in a new one every few weeks. Finally, I had a department head fax a copy into corporate for me before dropping off yet another copy to the HR witch. The next week, the HR witch called me into her office and told me I was going to have to put the frozen load for bakery away. I told her I couldn't do it and I had a note on file. She told me she didn't have any paperwork on file for me and that she could make me do anything she wanted. I called my department manager into my office and told him what she had said. I got corporate on the phone and asked if they had received a copy of my doctor's note detailing the fact that I had Raynaud's syndrome and had already previously gotten frostbite at work from being forced to be in the freezer when I wasn't supposed to be. He said they had it, and he then told them what HR Witch had said. He then handed HR Witch the phone. She had to hold the phone about 1.5 feet away from her face because they were yelling at her so loud. It was one of the most satisfying days ever working there. She went on leave shortly after that and never came back, and the official story was that she was having health problems. A substitute came into work completely hammered once. The job started at 8 and he drove there drunk. I get that junior high is stressful, but drink afterwards. That's not a great endorsement of the school he worked at the day before. One time, this complete moron I worked with in the shipyards, a pipe welder, was torching a pipe next to lagging, which is what helps insulate Navy ships. Instead of taking 5 minutes at most to use a blade to remove said lagging, the moron welded the pipe and torched the lagging. It doesn't burst into flames, but there was a lot of smoke and ended up getting the ship evacuated. He got fired 2 weeks later while his write-up was pending, because he put a ladder in the middle of a passageway, which are extremely tight when you consider the heavy equipment moving through. When he was asked to move, the welder told the person asking to F off. And when you tell that to the shipyard director, well, you tend to get fired. Worked in a single-story cinder block office with parking spaces out front. There was a big window that overlooked the parking lot. We had an older engineer, early 70s, that worked there. He pulled up one morning in his parking spot and must have gotten the brakes and the gas confused. He drove the car right through the window, taking out some of the wall with it. I can still remember seeing him gripping the steering wheel with this terrified look in his eyes while he kept slamming on the gas. The car must have gotten stuck on something because it would just lurch forward and the engine would rev. Luckily, he didn't kill anyone. He retired soon after that. It's actually a pretty common human error problem. People get the pedals switched in their head, and then panic causes them to lock their foot on the brake. We're fallible creatures. The narrator has fallen prey to this very problem before while riding a moped for the first time. It's amazing how long your brain can panic lock itself into holding onto the mechanical switch that does the opposite of what you need it to do. My coworker sold someone an auto insurance policy but forgot to check the effective date. Turns out she had pushed the start date of the policy out a month. Guy got into an accident a few days later. Cumulatively, we probably spent more than 10 hours on the phone trying to get claims to cover this guy's accident. She ended up messing up the effective date on about 10 other policies before she left. I work at a group home for people with mental and physical disabilities. Most of the residents can't walk or even stand on their own, so staff will help them stand or hold on to them while they walk so they don't fall over. Well, I had one coworker that was stupid. For multiple reasons, but this one takes the cake. She helped one of the residents stand up to use the restroom, had her put her hands on the handlebar attached to the bathroom, similar to the bathroom stall, and left to get things that the resident needed to take a shower. She left her standing there alone for a solid 3 or 4 minutes. Of course, the resident fell and hit her head pretty good. Had to go to the hospital and get stitches. She ended up being fine afterwards. How on earth my coworker wasn't fired is completely beyond me. I'm a welfare caseworker. A few months ago, I got a call from a client wondering what was going on with her case. Read the case comments and found out that one of my more intellectual coworkers shut down this case and assessed a 5-year overpayment on this client for her cash aid, basically saying that all the aid she'd ever received was fraudulent and she needed to pay it all back. Her reasoning? There was a glitch in the system that made this woman's child show as a resident in a different country. Rather than following established protocol and calling this woman, or ordering a fraud investigation from our literal unit of full-time investigators, or anything else that would make sense, she went out of her way to make this woman's life hard. For the record, I called the other county, and the worker I spoke with confirmed that the child was no longer a resident. His father had reported to them that the family was moving to our county 5 years ago, and they'd been trying, unsuccessfully, to update his county residence ever since. Because I caught the phone call, I had to unscrew the case and close out the overpayment. I work with preemies in a neonatal ICU. We get morphine in a multi-dose syringe that's good for 24 hours. We generally give doses for it every 4 hours. Every time we dose, we have to chart the amount in the electronic medical record, calculate a safe dose, draw it up, show it to another nurse along with the calculations, scan it. There's a million safety checks. A nurse did exactly none of these things and gave the whole syringe to the baby. Then she ordered another and did it again in 4 hours. And then she did it again 4 hours later. The baby got more than 3 days' worth of morphine in 12 hours. He had to be put on a breathing machine. Somehow, she did not get fired. There was a nursing shortage in Pennsylvania at the time. Sort of a similar situation. I worked in a blood bank and we sent some blood to the floor for a nurse to transfuse into a specific patient. Different nurse picked it up, doesn't look at the label, doesn't look at the patient name, doesn't do any of the 3 electronic checks and sticks it into a patient. Transfused the whole bag and then decides to let us know she made a simple mistake. No big deal. Okay, thanks, bye. Thank God the blood type matched, or she would have killed that patient. We're freaking out and filing reports to managers and the FDA. She gets a slap on the wrist and is transfusing the same patient later that day. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. This one time I worked at a company who made shelter cloth, like for orchards. It was woven from plastic thread. There were these huge banks of needles that just ran and ran, making these giant rolls of cloth. The night shift guy was pretty new, and the night shift was just him and the machine. It would take most of the shift to do a full roll with a setup and take down. The lunchroom was soundproofed because the production floor was pretty noisy. So the night shift guy basically just had to babysit the weaver all night and then change the rollout and set up for day shift. I came in early one morning because I wanted to pick up some gear I'd left in my locker, and I walk into the unholiest nightmare you've ever seen. A Gordian knot at least 30 foot high. The guy had sat there until like 2 a.m., the darkest part of the night. Then he decided to smoke some Mary J in the lunchroom and had fallen asleep. He woke up hours later to the sound of the weaver smashing itself to pieces. One of the needle banks had moved during the night and he hadn't seen the warning indicator. So then it had worked its way loose, then snapped, then flipped over and snapped the one next to it. Then it had made hundreds and hundreds of meters of messed up Frankenstein cloth with the giant kilometer-long thread bunches. I walked in to him screaming. He had woken up 15 minutes prior and had not got past freaking out. I could think clearer than him, so I went and got the big forklift and pulled this huge bird's nest off of the needle banks and slammed them in, and likewise hid the busted up ones in the dumpster. Then we started feeding in the new roll and just got the machine going again when the day shift came in. They were surprised that the night guy had got through the overnight materials so fast, but since it happened sometimes when the machine behaved, they didn't make a big deal. I went back to uni about 2 months later and never found out if the story continued. But the crazed look of the night shift guy screaming and holding his chest has stayed with me for 30 years. I can't imagine how much stress he was under, being brand new at a job and thinking that you had not only lost your job, but also completely wrecked the machine, a ton of material, and maybe been open to legal action might completely freak a person out. In 2009, we had some layoffs, like a lot of businesses, and one of those let go was a mechanic. Since most of the mechanics bring in a lot of their own toolboxes when one leaves the company, they'll need to load up their box. The screw-up was that the supervisor of the shop that day didn't pay attention or stick around while the mechanic was loading his box. The mechanic not only loaded up his box, he helped himself to several company-owned pieces of equipment, totaling $18,000 in value. But because the supervisor wasn't doing his job, there was no proof that the mechanic took those items. This is the same supervisor who didn't notice when a huge spool of copper wire somehow rolled itself out of the building. Said supervisor no longer works here either. New coworker on her first day went to get coffee from the break room, was walking back to it when she just barely stumbled a little bit, just enough that some hot coffee dripped over the edges of the cup and burnt her fingers, so she reactively flung her hand and released the mug, causing lots of hot coffee to go all over the walls just outside the boss's office. She literally just stared frozen at the coffee-drenched wall and said, "Oh, geez." We gave her heck for it for about a year in a joking way. She actually proved to be a fantastic co-worker. Used to deliver pizzas. Our dumb idiot manager that lived in a hotel and effed everything that moved contracted hepatitis A, but told no one and still came into work. After a few days, he began looking like an overweight banana and was complaining of all the classic symptoms. He was told to go home by corporate while we had to deep clean the store and throw away all of the ingredients due to possible contamination. In the middle of us cleaning, he decides to waltz in with what we think might be a working girl because he forgot his jacket. I was so dumbfounded that he would do this in front of one of the two bigwigs that were monitoring us. He was fired on the spot. 2 days after that, and our restaurant made the local news when a few people began to claim that they'd contracted Hep A from our pizza. There was a Hep A outbreak in our community at the time, so whether that was true or not, I'll never know. Sales suffered, and it took the store almost a year to recover. Let me tell you about Joe. Joe was hired as an entry-level developer. He started on a Monday. Every Tuesday, our team had a meeting in the first-floor conference room. Meeting time rolls around. No Joe. We wait. After a couple of minutes, I walk over to his cube. Not there. Check his break room. Nope. Stick my head in the men's room. Empty. Screw it. Go back to the meeting and tell my boss I have no idea. Maybe he forgot and was still at lunch. We start the meeting. A few minutes later, Joe walks in, about 15 minutes late. He apologizes and says he's been downstairs looking for the first-floor meeting rooms. Yes, he was wandering around the fricking basement looking for the first-floor meeting room. This was an omen of things to come. He was constantly falling asleep at his desk. He called out sick about 12 times in his first month. My boss finally told him one morning that they needed to have a talk. He had meetings most of the morning, so he told Joe to stop by his office around 11:30. Joe doesn't show up. Boss waits, and finally, at 12, we go to get lunch. While we're gone, Joe comes in, gets all of his personal belongings from his desk, and disappears. Never heard from him again. Now, whenever a newbie makes a mistake and is apologizing for it, we say, "Well, at least you know where the first floor is." I'm a cashier in a pharmacy. Anyone that works in the medical field knows that patient privacy is super important. When a patient picks up their prescription, we have to scan the receipt of their medication to the computer. This is unique to each individual prescription, so if it doesn't match, we accidentally grabbed someone else's medication. It catches mistakes before we make them. The alternative to scanning is typing the RX number into the computer. This doesn't guarantee a match. Only comparing the number on the receipt with the number on the computer will work if the barcode won't work. One day, while I was on break, someone came in looking for a prescription. The girl covering my post clearly confirmed the date of birth, but grabbed someone else's prescription by mistake. 2 people with the same last name were next to each other in the fridge. But she didn't scan the receipt, so her mistake was not caught. She typed the number she saw on the computer, had the person sign for their medication, and gave them someone else's medication. Not 20 minutes later, the patient calls and tells us what he received was not intended for him. We, of course, apologized, and he came back to get his medication. The sad thing is, once something leaves the store, it can't be returned. We can dispose of it, but we can't use it for someone else, even if it's still sealed. This particular medication cost $4,000, and we had to throw it out. This, plus the breach of privacy, didn't stand well, and she was written up for her mistake. She doesn't use cash much anymore and is confined to packaging. Ouchies. Accidentally wasting medication to the tune of a very generous monthly salary is one heck of a thing for a manager to hang over your head for the remainder of your employment there. One of the cops on a base I was stationed at ran his vehicle right into the wing of a jet. He then decided to throw the light bar that had been sheared off into a random dumpster like it had never happened. That idiot was caught immediately. This literally happened last Thursday. New teacher at the daycare, working in the baby room. Here's her list of what made everyone dislike her. 1. She told many aides she didn't like babies while working in the baby room. 2. She refused to change diapers, burp the babies, or even feed them in high chairs. 3. She just sat in the same chair and refused to do anything at all. 4. She wouldn't train new aides or help them in the room. And 5. She didn't care about bonding with the children or even her co-workers. But her biggest mess-up was that she let a baby roll off the changing table. According to my co-workers, she simply walked away from this child and left him there, and he rolled off and hit the floor. Apparently, she has a history of this, where other teachers and aides had to be like, "What the frick? Watch the baby and keep a hand on them at all times on the changing table." The only reason she took the job was because, and I quote, "Daddy won't give me spending money with my graduation present, so I'm just going to do this until July and then quit." Her grad present was a 2-week trip to Hawaii. She got fired for negligence, so good riddance. The baby is fine and the parents aren't suing or anything, and I can only think this is because the other teacher, who was feeding the new infant, was there, and they trust her heavily, and know she'd never put their son directly in harm's way. Good riddance. Worked at Arby's in 2016. It's approaching 10 p.m. and everybody working really wants to go home. A guy making sandwiches accidentally gets some bread stuck in the toaster oven. For some reason, he uses a knife with a plastic handle to try and get it out. The knife gets stuck, so he uses a second knife to get the first knife and bread out. That knife gets stuck, and he uses a third knife to get the other 2 knives and the bread out. Now all the knives are stuck in the toaster oven, and the plastic handle starts to melt. In short, step-by-step guide to getting the toaster oven at Arby's replaced. Someone I worked with at a Toyota dealership didn't rack an SUV right on the lift, and it fell off. It really did way less damage than I thought, but he was fired on the spot. When I worked at Home Depot, a co-worker who worked in lumber crashed the forklift into a car and messed it up pretty bad. Weapon shop owners. What crazy reasons have you had to refuse a person a sale? This lady was telling my brother, the owner of the shop, that she needed something more effective because the arrows she had been shooting weren't sinking the canoes and kayaks of people floating down the river in her backyard. They wanted to look at a piece up close. I took it out to let him see it, and he pointed it right at my face. Wasn't at the shop per se, but at the range inside the shop. I'd bought a .45 that I wanted to run a few rounds through and did just that. As I was leaving the booth and heading to the exit, an older gentleman tapped me on the arm and asked for help. I didn't work at this establishment, and compared to many, I don't have a ton of experience, but I have a pretty freaking solid understanding of safety with these devices. That being said, I stopped and asked him what he needed. He stated that he was having trouble with his weapon, which was on the bench in the booth, and that he couldn't get it to fire, even though the safety was off. As I was responding with the usual, "Do you have a round chambered?" he just picked it up, pointed it at himself, and pulled the trigger. By some sick divine intervention, it didn't fire. I slowly and firmly removed it from his hands and brought it back to said bench, where I removed the magazine and discharged a very live round. It took all of half a second to see that the safety was sitting in a cool, half-on, half-off position, and that he was scooting by on sheer dumb luck. I placed the device back on the bench, asked him to wait a minute, and walked out the doorway to the front desk. Before I could open my mouth, the range officer was walking around to give the guy a piece of his mind. In Texas, I was standing at my kitchen sink doing the dishes in a third-floor apartment one day, looking out the window. Directly across, the guy on 3 had come out with a piece and was cleaning it on a table. I looked away, and when I looked back, the family on 2 had let their toddler out on the patio with a toy. I watched in slow motion as this guy let go of the slide and aimed the piece at the ground, through the floor where the toddler was playing below, and fired a live round into the patio cement. As I was just out the door, I saw the kid's dad grab him and sweep him inside, but I've never been down and up 3 flights of stairs so quickly. In retrospect, it was stupid not to grab my own piece, and at least my phone, but Captain Intelligence on 3 wasn't hostile, just stupid. He was still holding the piece and shaking it when he answered the door. The kid was unhurt, but my faith in people's ability to safely exercise their rights may never recover. Meanwhile in Texas should be a subreddit by itself. The narrator is not mentally ready for the Meanwhile in Texas subreddit, and our viewers are certainly not ready for a 20-minute video of him attempting that accent. Other than the few who were drunk or high, one that sticks out was the guy who asked for the cheapest get, not so unusual, and only 1 bullet. After he noticed my reaction, he backpedaled and turned it into a joke. I obviously was still uncomfortable and looped my manager in. We ran the background check and told him it had been delayed and that he could come back tomorrow while we figured out what else we could do. He left without incident but then sat in his car in the parking lot for a long time. The manager decided contacting the police was the best route at the time. Not sure what happened afterwards, but he did not come back. Dude, we sell them in boxes of 20 minimum. How much more obvious can you be? Oh boy, I've turned down sales for simple things like mishandling the weapon and pointing it at people, for saying they were buying it for their husband 15 minutes after he was rejected on the InstaCheck system, but the one that took the cake was late one night, after selling hours anyways. I was closing down my department and this young couple came up to the counter. The guy was roughed up and bleeding from multiple cuts on his head. Nothing too bad, but still alarming. The girl he was with walked him up and said, "We need a piece." Rather than just say, "Sorry, it's after hours," I instead said, "Alright, which one?" She looked at the display cases and said, "I need one that will hurt someone." I just looked at her for a second, incredulous that she was that stupid. I said, "Well, they can all hurt someone." And she pointed at a Mossberg 22 and said, "What about that one?" And I said, "Yeah, that could hurt someone if it was used the wrong way." And she points at the Winchester. "What about that one?" I said, "That one is definitely dangerous." She said she'd take it, and that's when I said no. Sorry, it's past hours, and I just didn't trust her or him with a piece right now because he obviously just got his butt kicked. She started yelling at me and I said, "Alright, I think it's time to call the cops," and picked up the phone. That's when they said F off and left. It was pretty funny actually. The place I teach has had a few interesting ones. I saw a customer's probation officer's card in their wallet. The owner of the shop knew the probation officer and called and asked if their client was allowed to have a weapon. The answer, surprisingly, was no. There was a lady with symptoms of being homeless who came in looking for a small piece, and while furiously dry-firing a pocket 22 says, "It's not to kill someone, but like to teach them a lesson." Lots and lots of confused people thinking that one of these things can be in their spouse's or girlfriend's name or whatever, like a car loan. It's okay if she does the paperwork, right? No, it's not. The person buying the piece has to do the paperwork. My state also has legal, medicinal, and recreational green herb use. The owner doesn't care unless you make him care, but other places, if they see your medicinal card, they don't mess around. But they still have people who come in obviously reeking of Mary Jane, since we're between two dispensaries, and the owner will be like, "Come on, you wouldn't try to mess with a piece drunk, would you?" I don't work for a specialist shop, but I was involved with a pawn shop when it went down. A neighbor had dementia and lived alone. His son was a piece of crap and randomly got him caretakers who were seriously messed up individuals. Think cops outside at 3 a.m. saying the caretaker was asking for a ride at 6 a.m. on a Sunday, high as a kite. Apparently my neighbor owned a pair of weapons. His caretaker would pawn them monthly to buy substances and buy them back later when the neighbor's social security came in. I didn't know this, but what I did know is the caretaker was a felon, and he's not allowed to live in a house with that kind of ordinance lying around. It turned out they smelled something funny going on finally at the pawn shop when this guy, high as frick, eased this old man into the shop to sell his pieces every month. They wanted someone to co-sign for him, so he asks, reasoning that since I'm a good fellow and I work for the police department, I wouldn't have a problem with this. That I wouldn't have a problem with a felon and an elderly man with dementia buying weapons every month to store in the house. What a fricking crap show. I spoke to the manager, who went and got the store owner, who asked me to repeat the story. Thank the Lord they reported it and turned the weapons over to the cops. I'm not a clerk at one of those shops, but I've had to refuse several private sales for sketchy behavior. When people gripe about wanting to see an in-state ID or a carry permit, that's a pretty good indicator they aren't legally allowed to possess a dangerous weapon. I had one guy text me pictures of his automatic collection as proof that he had a Class 3, and therefore I wouldn't be violating the law by selling to an out-of-state buyer. He vehemently refused to meet at a federal licensing place to do the transfer, even when I offered to pay for it. Yeah, okay dude, you're clearly a felon and also your full auto-suppressed MP5 is actually a 22 with a fake can. I worked at Turner's Outdoorsman in Reseda during the early 2000s. One time a family came in, mother, father, and 13-year-old son. They wanted to buy a shotty for home protection. Okay, no problem. The issue was that they kept taking the countersample firearms and way overdoing it on racking them. The 13-year-old had obviously seen Terminator a few times and was racking the side like the woman in the movie did in the film, one-handed and really hard. That's not good for the equipment. I have to tell him to stop. The father got indignant, so I asked him to leave. I was in my early 20s, a blonde white girl, and they didn't like that. I had to get my manager to finally make them leave. I ran a weapons store and a pawn shop for 5 years. I advertised a lot of the inventory online on Facebook when that was still allowed. I had one guy ask every question imaginable about a high point, $100, a piece of garbage in my opinion. Then when he showed up, his girlfriend wanted to purchase it. That's gonna be a no from me, dog. I don't do straw purchases. Happened a lot. Guys would come in, ask about a weapon and negotiate a price, then try to send their wife or girlfriend up for the 4473. I feel good about every sale I ever denied. I only regret one sale. The piece in question was used by the gentleman to self-delete. A well-known local teacher you would never have known. Man spends 30 minutes pawning a high point, leaves without buying. 10 minutes later, strung-out-looking girl comes in, looks at her hand and goes, "Hello, I would like to buy a high point C9 in 9mm caliber with a high-capacity magazine, please." Classic. At least once a month in my store. That's incredibly concerning. Also, if it wasn't obvious, we have to use slightly more obscure words to refer to the projectile-firing descendants of old black powder weapons to get past certain limitations on this platform. But hopefully you've grasped the subject matter if you've made it this far. Just a noob question here from someone who doesn't know a lot. When you join the US Army, do they just forgo the background check, or is that part of your general background check for the forces? No. Been in the Army 13 years and have 6 weapons. The background check applies to everyone. You'll be denied a sale if you have a dishonorable discharge. At a second-hand shop, I was talking with the guy at the counter, and a dude walked in wearing full-on paramilitary, kinda school shootout garb, and a mask with a long arm slung on his back, and a smaller piece in his hand, loaded with the hammer back held out to the side, with his finger on the trigger, and he yelled if someone could help him. Obviously, me and the clerk both pull out our weapons and point them at this idiot and tell him to put it down. I'm looking around to see if there's anyone else around. People are freaking out in the parking lot because they see I have a piece, and I tell them to call the police. Turns out this inbred idiot had just come back from playing airsoft and wanted to sell a weapon he bought off the street. I'm not a shop owner. I was in a store when the following happened that made me go, how freaking stupid can you be? A guy came in to buy a weapon, begins to fill out NICS, checked yes on 11B, are you under felony indictment, and got denied. He said, well, I'm out on bail, so I should be able to have a weapon. The clerk asked what for. Domestic. Checked no on H. Do you have an order of protection against you? The clerk says he's going to call NICS to file an appeal. The clerk calls the police. The police arrive. The idiot is arrested and goes back to jail with new charges, including lying on Form 4473. I know criminals are dumb, but come on, man. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I sold the items in question in a sporting goods store. A guy comes in and was looking at our selection. He claimed he was a former CIA assassin. Sure, whatever. He picked up a weapon, cocked it, and pointed it at me and pulled the trigger. I put it back and told him he was not buying anything from me or anyone else in this department. He looked at me and said, I'll be back for you. I called over one of my colleagues who was an off-duty cop that worked there part-time and told him what had happened. He flashed his badge and told the guy to leave the store and to not come back. The man left, cussing up a storm, and I never saw him again. When I'm reading this, I'm just imagining the customer as a really edgy teen. A lady came into my store and wanted to buy a Ruger 10-22, but when she told me which one she wanted, she just said, the black one. Fine, I don't care if she doesn't know the name, and I thought, what a perfect opportunity to upsell her on some training that we offered. Well, I got out the old form and walked her through my generic spiel, noting specifically, if you have no middle name, please put NMN in the box for middle name, not just NA. Just write NMN for no middle name. Attempt 1, the lady puts a big X through the box for middle name. I calmly explain it to her again and get her a new form. She puts NA in the box. I look at her questioningly and ask if she has a middle name, to which she responds no. I start to explain the process to her for a third time when she gets livid, picks up the 4473 form and rips it in half, and calls me a racist white boy cracker, who is being difficult over a stipularity. I think it was a cross between stipulation and technicality. I looked at her plainly and said, well, if you can't fill out the form, you can't buy the weapon. The sale is denied. After some more heated words sent my way, she was escorted out by the owner, who was watching the whole thing and listening from the back office 10 feet away. I denied a sale when someone admitted that they'd shot a bear at a state park out of season, poaching, and another time when someone pretty much told me they were going to use the item to kill a guy in Alabama. I also stopped numerous straw purchases. Most of the time, people didn't understand that it wasn't legal. The number of people who would absolutely lose their minds when I would have to walk them out the front door before I could give them their weapon was crazy. It was just store policy, but sometimes it would make the most normal weapon buyer turn nuts. There was this one guy who would come in about once a week with a new person each time. They'd be buying a weapon for themselves, but they didn't know anything about weapons. At first, I thought the guy was just helping friends pick one out, but after a while, he winked at me and said, "See you at the revolution." Cult leader? Anti-government? Who knows? I soon after left that job and never saw him again, but it sure left me with stories. As much as I'm sure all of our viewers from the States will enjoy hearing this from a person with a British-ish voice, there really needs to be a better form of control than just filling out a simple form, even though that basic task does seem to elude some of these morons. I was at my local store for these items, just chatting after picking a few things up. Another guy comes in looking for suppressors, says he's interested in one, to which the clerk starts explaining the tax stamp paperwork. In my state, you can own NFA items no problem. You don't get jammed up, but still go through the ATF process. The guy digests it all, says that's fine, understands the $200 tax, etc. The guy says something along the lines of, "Okay, I'll fill everything out and then come pick it up later this afternoon." To which the employee laughs, thinking he's joking, because if you've ever been through the process, the wait time is on average 9 months to a year. Personally, the fastest I've had an item processed is 7 months, but every other one has been at least 9. So the store employee was obviously thinking he's joking. The guy was dead serious and that he thought he could pick it up that afternoon. He got really irate and started cussing the employee out, and said, "If you're not willing to give it to me today, why do you even display them?" Then came a few racial slurs. The employee helping him was Hispanic, and as the rest of the employees came over to escort him out, he said something like, "Y'all wait until I raise hell with the Better Business Bureau," and then a few more racial slurs before he was physically escorted out. The other one was told me by a friend who works at a different store. The guy comes in wanting to buy a piece, and when handed the paperwork, he says, "Oh, I didn't think there were background checks in this state," and leaves. Not long after all this, a patron who had just left the range comes back in letting them know that as soon as he got to his car, some guy came up asking if he'd sell one of his pieces for cash, no questions asked. The guy was just walking around the parking lot asking people if they would sell him one. When the police came and arrested him, he actually yelled, "But I was told anyone can buy guns in this state without ID." That was his actual response to the police. Apparently he had warrants in California and a bunch of missed court appearances. Another one was relayed to me from a friend who was at an auction house bidding on some weapons. Up for auction, there was a double-rune Mauser, which symbolized the rifle was likely used or issued by German special forces in World War II. They tend to sell for a very high premium. Some guy who got outbid tried to cause a scene about how these weapons should stay with the race and not go to those people, still arguing about it as the police arrested him after refusing to leave. Used to work at a specialist store and law enforcement supply. I saw a lot of stupid things, cops almost discharging their duty weapon, etc., even had a couple of holes in the ceiling from before I started. But the craziest reason I've denied someone was arguably the dumbest. Not dumb in the way some of the others have posted, I had plenty of denials for attempted straw purchase. So this frequent customer decides to bring his dad in one day to get a new piece to carry. Spend about 30 minutes helping him pick out a good one and a nice holster to go with it. He filled out the background check form and I'm getting ready to call it in when I noticed something odd. In the section where you select your ethnicity, he had drawn his own checkbox and wrote, "Native Mexican American." I informed him that he wasn't allowed to do that and he just needed to do as the instructions stated. Select the box that matched his ethnicity the closest, i.e. Latino. He just could not be convinced to select a meaningless box on a form that the info didn't even get reported on. I had to deny the sale. I half wonder if he was just crazy or if he was an agent testing me with something stupid. A guy with SS Thunderbolts on his neck. I didn't even show him his piece he sent for the transfer, just told him to get out and I sent the weapon back. There was also a crazy lady who during the paperwork said it was for protection from the Mexicans in her basement that snuck up in the night to get her. I told her she was delayed and called the police. In case you're wondering, this is Tucson, Arizona, where there are almost no basements. And finally, a lady who came in asking for a particular model. We showed it to her. I asked her questions about ammo as she was smaller and it was a large weapon. She kept checking her phone and said this is the one she wanted, even though she didn't know the caliber or the first thing about these kinds of weapons. I put two and two together, I explained what a straw purchase is and told her to leave. A customer came in and picked out a weapon, did the 4473 and failed the NICS check, tried to get us to sell it to his girlfriend instead. That's a big no. I sell at weapon shows with my buddy who has an FFL, and these young kids, they had to be about 13 years old, came up with a stack of cash, around $2,000, and they wanted to buy 4 AKs, so I asked them for ID as I pulled out the 4473s, because I've seen older guys that look young as heck as well. I told them that each AK is $700 and they said, wait, what are those papers? So I asked them how old they were and they said 18, but didn't want to fill out the paperwork because they want to take them to Mexico. I told my buddy to go call the cops and they left as quickly as they could. I had a woman buy 10,000 rounds of .22 long round and tried to buy 2 Ruger 10-22 rifles and a Smith & Wesson MP15, and she filled out her 4473 and I called it in and she got delayed. The FBI can delay the sale or pickup for 5 days in North Carolina if the person needs an investigation on their background. I'm still waiting for a reply, and she comes back the next day to ask if felons can buy weapons, and that she hopes they could because she was tired of seeing the zombies eat people in her yard and highway and crap. I was dumbfounded. I couldn't believe that she didn't instantly get denied when I called the day before. If she just admitted to this crazy crap, I manage a second-hand shop in North Carolina for those wondering. Customer here. I once saw a guy claiming to be a veteran throw a tantrum about how he misunderstood the waiting period and apparently failed to file proper DROS paperwork, so his waiting period had to restart. The whole room got quiet and I was pretty sure he was seconds away from being denied and getting escorted out until he came to his senses and filed the correct documents. Good lord! Can you withhold sales from someone who nearly flies off the handlebars like this? Part of me is wishing you could, although I suppose it would be hard to justify. I was at a store once when the owner, Gunther, prevented 2 people from buying big automatic pieces. One of them was institutionalized for setting her roommate on fire, and the other one was wanted for questioning in many felonious assaults. In the store I worked at, I was hit with a wall of alcoholic stench from 5 feet away. He couldn't even spell his own name right on the background check and expected me to fill it out. He didn't have a form of ID. He wanted the cheapest piece we had. It was all around just a bad experience. My friend used to work as a security guard at the local psych hospital, but because of the laws, he can't state specifically why he's denying each person. When he sees people who he knew were admitted for mania with homicidal ideation, he would just tell his boss, the owner, that he was refusing the sale and knew the customer from prior work experience. His boss knows how to read between the lines on that, and fortunately, federal law supports their right as a shop to refuse to sell a weapon to anyone provided that the reason isn't because of their race, ethnicity, or other federally protected discrimination statuses. I've seen people get refused for stupid reasons, like outright saying that they're buying it for someone else. Not an owner, just a law here in Australia I learned about recently. If you've had a restraining order placed against you, which can be applied for anyone even without proof of any danger, in the last 10 years, then you're ineligible to own, use, or buy a gun. Serving staff, what's the most awkward first date you've seen go down while working? At the end of the dinner, 2 couples on a double date dine and dash. I chased them down and the girls had no clue. Their dates had told them they'd already paid. The girls ended up paying. The guys had no cash. As a former server, I have to say it's not the first dates that stick out, it's the "we're breaking up and let's have dinner and talk about it" tables that really stay with you. My wife broke up with me while we were dating at an Indian restaurant. We made up and have been married about 8 years now, but it took a darn long time before I could eat Indian food again. More sad than awkward, a guy in a wheelchair came in at about 1:45. Says he has a date at 3, but the only ride he had there was early. So I sat him at a table for 2, he munches on bread for a while and decides to go outside for a bit. He ends up coming in about 20 minutes later and starts telling me and the host I'm working with cheesy jokes. He also mentions that he used to be a policeman before he became wheelchair-bound. He also told us his date is from Panama. The other host and I had a bad feeling about this situation at that point. 3 o'clock rolls around and I see the guy anxiously glancing between his phone and the door. About 45 minutes of this pass before he finally leaves. This was one of the saddest things I've ever seen. I was a line cook at a restaurant. It was a typical Friday night and pretty busy in the kitchen. A server came in and asked if I spoke Chinese. I said yes, and he told me to go talk to some guest at a table. I told him they'll have to wait because we're in the middle of a dinner rush. About an hour later, things slow down a little, so I follow up with the server. He proceeded to point out the table of guests that needed help. So I walked out of the kitchen with the expectation of maybe translating the menu for them or something. When I got up to the table, I noticed it was a white guy and an Asian girl. So I asked the gentleman how I could help him. He then asked me to translate for him. It was at that point that I realized they were on a first date. The guy asked me to translate a few things for him like, "How did you enjoy the dinner?" and "Did you enjoy the date so far?" and other small talk. And I'd have to translate that to the girl and translate her response back to English for him. This went on for about 5 to 10 minutes. Eventually, he asked me to ask the girl if she wanted to sleep with him. The girl asked him if he had a girlfriend. I had to stand there and translate this conversation. Eventually, the girl shot the guy down, and it got pretty awkward at that point, so I found an excuse to go back to the kitchen. In short, had to translate for a guy and asked the girl if she wanted to do the deed with him. I'm honestly just flabbergasted that they arranged this date with such a big hurdle in making basic conversation in place. I think if I had to do this while working, they'd have to get one question in at a time between me, doing my job that they're keeping me from. A young couple was at my table. They were probably 16. She was way overdressed for Red Lobster and a movie, but that was cute. He went to pay and his card was declined. I felt so horrible walking back to the table. He said there should be plenty in his bank account, and I asked if he'd put gas in his car before the date. He said he filled up his truck. Some gas stations here hold the amount twice on a debit card after a certain hour, and it drops off the next day. The poor kid was so embarrassed he had no idea what to do. My boss paid for his meal, my tip, and gave him money for the movie they were planning to go to. The kid came back in 2 days later with all of the money to pay my boss back. Man, this story. I've never associated Red Lobster with classy, but your boss changed that. I can't believe he even gave some cash for the movie, too. Bartender here. Had a guy this past summer come in for Match.com meetups 4 different times with 4 different ladies. For one of his dates, he told everyone else at the bar that he was from Match.com. His date was late, so everyone at the bar was concerned for him. He told everyone to clap when she arrived. When she finally came, everyone at the bar clapped and cheered. She was horribly embarrassed. No wonder why this guy doesn't hold on to girls for long. She'll be on guard from the second she walks in the door. Why not just get everyone in the place to yell out, "Norm!" Had a professor in college that had us clap when a student would walk in late. He had a really good laugh when we did it when he was late. I'm a hostess, and when we seat people, we have to talk about the specials happening that day. Well, anywho, 2 people came in and they don't appear to be a couple. Both were very stern looking. I started giving my spiel about the drink specials, and she cuts me off and says she won't be drinking tonight. The guy looks at her and asks why. She tells him that she's pregnant. And let's keep in mind that I'm right here between them with no option to walk away because I'm still holding the menus. Well, he freaks out, quickly questioning her, and getting very angry, she starts yelling at him. A lot of tension is floating around, and in the midst of all this anger about being pregnant, I chime in and mention that we're also having a special on our baby back ribs. The moment after I realize what I just said, they're staring at me with their jaws dropped. I look them dead in the eye and walk away. I'm not good in these types of situations. Yes, we have some baby back ribs on special, as well as a nice Asian stir-fry with baby bok choy and baby corn. We also have a lobster special that of course comes with a bib. There's also a cheese platter featuring Baby Bell. What can I get started for you? This happened to a friend of mine. We'll call him Alex. Because for this situation, we need a unisex first name. He's on a blind date with a friend of a friend. Alex gets a table at a fairly fancy restaurant that his friend Steve works at as a manager. He arrives first and she gets there about 15 minutes late. No big deal, they chat over drinks. At this point, he doesn't think it's going super great, but doesn't think it's too awkward. At some point after they ordered their food, she excuses herself to the bathroom. A minute or so after she leaves the table, he gets a text on his phone. It's from his date. It says something along the lines of, "I hate blind dates. This guy is a total loser. At least I'll get a few free meals out of him." Alex realizes that the text wasn't meant for him, but for his date's female friend, also called Alex. He gets up from the table and finds Steve in the back and tells him what happened, asks for his half of the order taken off the ticket, and then leaves before she gets back to the table. Alex's date comes back from the bathroom, apparently unaware that she texted the wrong person. Due to some mix-up, the entire order still arrives at the table. Reportedly, she didn't even wait for or even question Alex's absence before she began eating. In fact, she finishes nearly all of her meal before asking her waiter to check where Alex had gone. The waiter checks with his manager, Steve, finds out about the situation and informs her that Alex left while she was in the bathroom. He then hands her the check. The best part is that she didn't have enough money to cover the check. She had to call a friend to come down to the restaurant and pay for her meal. Steve wasn't too keen on letting her slide on the bill. In short, woman accidentally texts her date about only going out with him for free food. He sticks her with the check. I have been waiting so long to tell this story. So I'm a server at Red Robin, and I once served a teenage couple, probably around 17 or 18, easily seniors in high school. They'd obviously been dating for a while since they already knew what they wanted and ordered for each other. The date night seemed to go pretty well. They ordered their drinks, ordered an appetizer, then ordered their food. Only their drinks had come out, yet when finally holding hands for a long while, the guy looks into the girl's eyes and apparently broke up with her. I'd been standing from a distance, keeping an eye on my tables, when suddenly I see this happening and watch the girl's face just turn from happiness to absolute horror. Tears well up and she starts banging her fists on the table, screaming out at him that he's a butthole and whatnot. Everyone in the restaurant can hear it and everything just stops. As she's becoming more and more volatile, he's trying to calm her down. I'm not sure what to do at this point. Even my manager had come out and looked at me as if we both don't know how to handle this. Finally, the guy yells, Fine. If you don't want to be civil, then I'll go." She begs him to stay, but he pries himself away and beelines for the door. She doesn't follow him. He passes me on the way to the door, stops and walks back towards me. He hands me $50 and says, "You can obviously already see why I did what I did. I'm just sorry that you had to deal with this here and now. Take care of her and make sure she's okay." He then leaves. She sat for the next 3 hours, not crying but just staring blankly into the wall. She ate both of their meals and the tower of onion rings. On another note, a lady crapped herself at my work once. In short, broke up, broke down, and broke waistline. I'm somewhat unclear whether the lady that made brown in the server's workplace was one and the same person who ate the 2 meals and the tower of onion rings. It seems very probable, but it's written in such a way that they've preserved the mystery. Seems like the cherry or piece of gooey fudge on top of this miserable experience. Guy comes in alone and asks for a table for 2. I seat him in the corner in a booth where it's quiet and secluded. He says his date should be here any minute. I get him the beer he ordered and a bunch of chips and salsa. 20 minutes later, he's on his second beer and he promises me that she's going to be here soon. She just texted him and said she's on her way. I really don't care because it's really slow and I like the guy because he's super low maintenance. I brought him out some queso to go with the chips he was eating alone. An hour goes by. There were 2 instances of a single woman coming in saying she was meeting someone, and both of those women were directed to this guy. But neither of them were his date. Now I'm just kind of feeling bad for the poor fella. 3 hours after I sat him down, he had had 9 beers, and I brought him a few rounds of shots occasionally just because we, the entire staff, felt so bad for him. He was fricking lit. He goes out the back door to start chucking up in an alleyway, as his date finally walks through the door. I sat her down at their table, get her a drink, and then went out back to give the guy a smoke and let him know his date was here. He was not happy. I walked him back inside, sat him down, and watched them formally introduce each other. I didn't realize this was a blind date. I left awkwardly and immediately. They paid and left maybe 5 minutes after that, just enough for the lady to finish her drink. I guess she gave him a ride home, but I don't really know. I didn't think she was actually going to show up, otherwise I'd have cut him off well before that. Oh well, hope he got some action that night. Who does she think she is, showing up 3 hours late for a date? To be somewhat fair, when she did arrive, she looked like she'd been crying her eyes out and seemed incredibly flustered. I didn't want to pry, especially considering the drunk mess she was about to have a date with. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Well, I'm assuming bartending is close enough to serving staff since I did serve the food as well. I did this for a number of years, but one story, man, this stands out. This younger lady came in by herself, comes up to the bar, and says she'd like a table in the back alone. It's a slow night and I was working alone, so I sat her, brought her a drink. She's there for about an hour, has a couple of drinks and keeps checking her phone. I finally ask her if she's expecting someone and her response was a sad smile and a nod. Almost immediately after that, this guy, early 30s, comes in and asks for a table for two. This guy reeks of D-bag. On his arm is this slightly trashy, very early 20s girl who's already drunk, loud, and freaking obnoxious. She keeps talking about how lucky she is to finally get this guy out with her. How it's been the best first date ever. I get them their food order and they can barely keep their hands off each other. I also notice that the lady sitting by herself has gone white as a ghost and is shaking a little bit. She takes out her cell phone and takes a few pictures. About this point, I know what's going on and I just try to avoid it. Lady number 1 walks up, puts some papers down on the table and says, "We're getting divorced." She then looks at the lady, who turns out to be her little sister, and tells her to never talk to her again. She then comes up, pays for her meal and walks out, leaving the most utterly destroyed first date I've ever seen. It was phenomenal. Yeah, I got a few more of the details when she came back later. But her husband didn't know it was his sister-in-law. And this was not the first time he'd cheated, just the first time with the sister. So maybe a stretch, but I figured it was close. Yay, something I can finally answer. I once had a table where this guy came in for a blind date. When the girl got there, it was obvious she was already a little tipsy. Well, a little ways into the meal and after having one drink, she chucked up all over herself at the table. She went to the bathroom and the guy had to ask another server to go and check on her. In the bathroom, she also proceeded to empty her guts all over the toilet seat. I felt so bad for the guy, but he was so nice about it. He waited for her to get cleaned up and took her home. That must have been the most awkward car ride ever. We have a rich, middle-aged dude that comes in almost every Friday with a new date. A couple of servers I work with have a pool if the date will last shorter or longer than 30 minutes. Unders have won, probably 70% of the time. I think the best story I heard from one of his dates was when he asked where the lady was from. She answered Miami and he told her to leave. Weird dude. I was a waitress in college. A couple came in and sat at my table. Just your average Minnesota man and a nice Latina lady. They started chatting and it immediately became clear to me that she speaks no English. None. It turns out I'm fluent in Spanish, so I went back to take their order, and I sat and translated for them for a bit. It was awkward, but okay. I went back a few minutes later to drop off their appetizer, and this man looks at me and says, "I can't do this. Tell her I'm leaving." I said, "No, absolutely not." He said, "Well, I'm leaving whether you tell her or not, so you probably should." As I started to panic, both of them just burst out laughing. Turns out they're regulars that have been married for 20 years. They were trolling me after a friend told them I spoke Spanish. That is devious and brilliant. I hope they tipped you supremely well, madam. This one starts out awkward, but it takes a bit of a turn. I'm a host. I sat a gentleman very well dressed named Greg, who told me he was meeting a girl for their first date. About half an hour passes and no one shows up. It's a Sunday night, so it's pretty slow. I came by and checked on him. He hadn't heard from her or anything. Another half hour, then another. He finishes his entree, pays, and walks up to me and says, "Damn, she's not coming. Whatever." I try to convince him to stick it out at the bar for a little bit, but he isn't having it. He leaves. 20 minutes later, a girl shows up. She says her phone is dead and her car broke down on the way to her date with a guy named Greg. I say he got fed up and left, and she starts to cry because she really thinks she messed up. I tell her it'll be okay. The guy signed up for a rewards program and we had his cell number. Officially, I'm not supposed to do this, but I called him back up and told him his date was here, and he didn't believe me, so I put her on the phone and he was back 20 minutes later. They seemed to really hit it off, and as he left he said, "Thanks, man," and he slipped me a $5. The only direct tip I've ever gotten. They just came in together yesterday. It makes me really happy that they're still dating. I was working at a restaurant and this guy I'd met a few days before came in before my shift ended to wait for me. He was going to take me out as soon as I finished. He was a few hours early. I brought him a drink and told him it would be a while, and he said that was fine. The place got pretty busy, and after a while I noticed there was a girl sitting down with him having a drink. I went over to bring him another beer and she was drinking as well. I served them more drinks, he introduced her as an old friend from school, and she kind of just gave me a quick up and down, seemed annoyed, and started chatting away with him, giggling at everything he said. It was a bit weird to watch. My boss asked me if I could stay late because it had become so busy, but I said no. I'm actually going on a date and pointed him out. She laughed and said, "Really? With the guy who's been drinking with that other girl?" I sheepishly said yes. The girl had left just before I was done, but he was pretty drunk by that point, so I asked him if he still wanted to go, and he said, of course. Anyway, he ended up being so wasted that I left and went home. I went out with him again and again. He got way too drunk and passed out each time. I turned him down the next time he asked. About a year later, I was working at a different bar and they walked in newlyweds. I found this out when she told the bartender she wanted to beat me up or something because I was trying to take her man. She didn't, and I told the bartender what happened, but I'd be interested to hear how she perceived what was happening. So yeah, that was pretty much the most awkward first date I've seen while working as a waitress, and it was mine. So I work at Great American Cookies as a cake decorator, and we get "Will you be my date" cakes all the time. Sometimes the customers give us flowers or a card to give to the person that comes to pick it up. Like boyfriend orders cake, gives us a flower, girlfriend picks up cake, and we give her the flower. Kind of like singing messengers. One day, an older male came up and ordered a cake for his wife's birthday and asked if we could give her an envelope as she was the one to pick it up. Just curious, we asked him what was in it. He said tell her to open it there with us and she'd tell us all about it, that it was a surprise. We agreed and he paid for the cake, and later that day the wife comes up and gets the cake and envelope. She loves her cake even though it's pretty simple, and opens the envelope as he had instructed. She starts bawling her eyes out. This guy had us serve her the divorce papers. We noticed he was standing only a few feet away. He was a scumbag Steve if I've ever seen one. Long story short, we don't take envelopes without the customers telling us exactly what's inside from then on. Oh, and he got us to serve papers for free when anyone else would have charged $50. Didn't even tip us for having to deal with his crying, soon-to-be ex-wife. In short, scumbag Steve made a cake decorator serve his wife divorce papers when she came to pick up her birthday cake. Not really a waiter, but I worked as a barista and witnessed numerous obvious first dates. One time, this super nerdy guy brings in this pretty attractive girl. I'm rooting for him because I used to be quite nerdy and had a tough time with the ladies. Anyway, the guy starts talking on and on about his favorite sci-fi and fantasy books, as well as some card game that sounded similar to D&D. There's nothing wrong with those interests, but the girl was clearly not receptive. She was giving him all kinds of physical and verbal cues that she wanted to change the discussion. But this guy would not stop talking. While I was watching, I wanted to help him, tell him to change the subject or something, but I couldn't think of any smooth way to help him out. Maybe it was because he was nervous. He gets up to go to the bathroom and knocks the table, which causes the girl's hot latte to be spilled all over her front. He apologized profusely, but you could see that she had checked out of the date. She left after drying herself. I hope he found a girl that appreciates sci-fi books and Piers Anthony as much as he does. You should have spilled coffee on him to shut him up. Whisper to him, "You can thank me later." Mum comes in earlier that day and tells me she's helping her son plan his first date. She asked if I could help her make everything look really fancy and all the good stuff. I didn't have much to do that day, so I said, why not? I got everything ready for them. I held a great table with a great view of the ocean for them, chilled a bottle of apple cider by their table, got a dessert tray ready. It was fancy. Heck, I would have loved to go on that date. I kid you not, little Billy and Susie were staring at their cell phones the entire time. It was a dimly lit place, all you could see was the candlelight and their faces because of their phones. I was teed off. I'd been ready to give this kid a high five on the way out, to give him a "go get her, son." But no, I was ashamed instead. Oh, I also planned a proposal for this guy and all of their friends. He was supposed to do it on the beach before they came in, got cold feet and had to hide all of his friends. He texted us saying he'd do it on the table, got cold feet before dessert, and nothing. I was honestly feeding his friends all the bread we had in the place because we were waiting for them. Finally, he did it, she said yes, and we all cheered. Good times. Not a first date, but very awkward. A guy comes in with an escort and drops a good amount of money on booze at the bar. She then leaves a few hours later and he informs us that his wife is on her way to meet him for dinner and tips us an extra $200 to keep our mouths shut, keeping it classy. What was the most absurd, strict rule you had to live by growing up? My parents were horrible parents in general, but the most bizarre rule that my siblings and I put up with was that we weren't allowed to sneeze multiple times in a row. One sneeze? Fine. Another sneeze after some arbitrary number of minutes later? No problem. 2 sneezes in a row? Get yelled at for being unhygienic, even if you covered your mouth and nose properly, and for having no manners. God forbid if you sneezed thrice or more in a row. I have seasonal allergies, and one time my dad was in a particularly bad mood and caught me in a sneezing fit and grounded me for a week. I find it almost impossible to sneeze just once. After I open those floodgates, there's usually another one or two in the chamber ready to pop. I was grounded from the time I was 8 until I moved out. My stepmom would always find another reason to extend it, no matter how small, even just my bookcase being messy, and at some point it just became normal that I wasn't allowed to do anything, and my dad didn't bother to fight it. And grounding for me didn't just mean I couldn't play video games. It was everything. I had no access to any kind of tech. She took away my alarm clock when she found out I was using the radio on it, and I couldn't go outside. I couldn't watch TV. I couldn't be up past 8. Yes, even in summer when I was 17. I couldn't leave my room without a good reason, and I wasn't allowed to be in my sister's room or talk to her at all. I lost my real mum at 5, and my stepmom came into the picture within the year. I was still nowhere near recovering and felt like she was trying to replace my mum, so of course I wouldn't call her mum or anything like that. She and my father married when I was 7 without asking me or my sister. 3 at the time. My little sister was only 1 when my mum died and didn't feel bad letting our stepmom be mum. She didn't know anything else. She loved my sister and hated me, and I started doing worse and worse in school, giving my stepmom reason enough in my dad's eyes to keep me grounded that whole school year. It just never stopped after that. When I was still quite young, she found a cover to an adult movie DVD I'd found in the trash and gave me a whack with her belt. My grandparents, mum's side, got pictures of the bruises, but were too afraid that my dad would move me across the country to do anything. It was enough that she was never physical again, but she just started making me write sentences after that. It started out, "I will not lie" 100 times, but that didn't keep me busy long enough, so she kept adding to it every time I did something she didn't like. The worst was when I was 14 and I ate some stevia packets from the top of the fridge and told her I didn't know where the empty packets came from out of fear. I will not lie, I will not steal, God hates a thief, and sin is death. 10,000 times. Due by the end of the month, in December. While I was writing them out, she came by my door, didn't say a word, and just set her belt on the doorknob. That was about as bad as it got, and honestly, I consider myself lucky it never got worse. I went to my grandparents' house every weekend, and they tried to spoil me as best they could. They weren't rich, but they loved me and gave me everything they could. I wouldn't be anywhere near the kind of person I am today without them, and so I'm thankful that they were part of my life. They taught me how a family is supposed to show love, since my mum couldn't, my stepmom wouldn't, and my dad didn't know how. Damn, that stepmother is practically following some step-by-step walkthrough on how to traumatize someone throughout their upbringing, and that was downright neglectful of your dad. Hope you did okay later in life. My mother would come home from work occasionally and say, "I know you did something you weren't supposed to. Go to your room. You have 15 minutes to think about what you want to say. If you lie, you'll get double punishment." I would freak out and say anything I thought might be bad I did during the day. I watched TV and I wasn't supposed to. I forgot my textbook at school. I made fun of a girl at school. I climbed a tree, among other things. She'd ground me for a week and I would feel relieved it wasn't worse. The messed up thing is that she had no idea what bad thing I did. She just knew I would confess to anything and everything. Being raised religious, I always thought I was sinning. So this was a way for her to control me and ground me so she was comfortable with where I was when she had night shifts. My mom once kicked me out of the house for being gay, and I'm not even gay. My mom wanted me to be gay. Once a friend and I got wet in the rain on the way home, and she asked if we were going to use the shower. Both. At the same time. She brought towels for both of us. She was extremely disappointed when I told her I got a girlfriend. If I tooted, I was forced to spend 2 hours outside, even in the freezing winter. One day, I collapsed in the cold and was taken away from my mum after I was hospitalized for 3 hours after collapsing. I then lived with my grandparents for the rest of my childhood, and legally wasn't allowed to see my mum until I was 18. I guess it counted as child endangerment. Something less serious, my mum was paranoid that everyone and everything was a kidnapper. She hated the mailman on our route, so when I was young, 3 or 4 years old, my mum told me it was illegal to be outside when the mail came. About 11:15 every day, I'd see that truck coming. I'd hightail it inside the house, terrified that I'd be spotted. Fast forward 30 years, I genuinely still feel a tinge of panic in the smallest recesses of the back of my brain when I see the mailman arrive. Only now it's overpowered by the excitement of my latest Amazon package that I don't really need. My time to shine. No nail polish, no tights under dresses, No drinking tea. Not allowed to watch anything with any cursing. Had to call my parents sir and ma'am, and now they're upset that I call them this instead of mum and dad, by the way, but it's what they asked me to do. Bedtime of 9:30 until I was 18. Parents took my phone at 9 p.m. every night when I was in high school and read through all of my texts. They were allowed to open my bank statements. Not a rule, but my parents would read my diary and go through my computer, and once left video cameras up while I was hanging out with a friend and talking. They loved to repeat things I'd said or written to me, just to let me know that I had no privacy. In elementary school, my parents sat me down and said, "We just want you to know, if you get pregnant while living with us, we will kick you out." My parents gave my dog away while I was at school one day without telling me. I was 9. And these days they wonder why I never want to share anything with them. Geez, this is all rubbish. My mom would read my diary too, but she never told me. She'd read it and then try to trick me into lying about something I wrote so she could punish me. I didn't know she was doing this for years. She convinced me that God told her what I'd done and led her to test me. My dad didn't snoop into my things that I know of, but he loved to accuse me of wanting to do the deed with my brother's friends, while he himself tried to get with my classmate. She was 15, he was in his 50s. Aren't parents the best? The only thing I can't figure out is your no tea rule. Why? Did they think it was poisonous? Or anti-American? If you're American, that is. Oh, and why no tights? I wasn't allowed to wear dresses without tights, lest someone see the bare flesh of my thighs. Ha! I wasn't allowed to swim in public swimming schools because I'd catch transmissible diseases from them, apparently. When my PE class would go to the pool 1 week a year, I had to walk laps around the pool because I couldn't participate. My stepdad typed up and printed a 5-page list of rules. He made me print, sign, and date the last page. I was to be held accountable, and if any rules were broken, I had to move out. I wasn't a bad kid. The whole thing was to establish his dominance of me. I wasn't allowed to leave my room. I couldn't go to the bathroom or kitchen, but I better have a reason to be there. So the narrator came to this story grouping mostly hoping for goofy rules about weirdos who are legally obligated to pledge fealty to the family cat every morning or something. Instead, we have the usual stories of conservative Christian repression and just downright imprisoning their kids. Sad stuff. Holding out for something goofier. I couldn't shave my legs until I was 16. I did when I was 12. My mum found out and grounded me. I had to ask to get a drink of anything or eat anything. I couldn't go anywhere unless my little brother could go with me too, or if he had a play date. If he didn't have anyone to play with, then I couldn't either. We were 8 years apart, by the way. Nobody in my house was allowed to get the mail except my dad. Doesn't matter what time he got home, leave the mail in the mailbox. He'd also personally open all the mail no matter the recipient. He'd always know if anyone touched it. To clarify, we aren't in piles of debt, I'm not Harry Potter, and I think he just likes control. My parents were super laid back, but my mother's stepdad Larry could be a huge butthole. She told me that one morning, as a kid, she was given a chocolate-covered donut, and, as a kid will do, decided to start nibbling off the chocolate. Larry decided this annoyed the crap out of him and asked her promptly to stop eating the donut like that. "Oh, just let her eat the donut how she wants," said Mum's mum, washing dishes. My mum continues to eat chocolate around the edges, and Larry shoots up, shouting, "Knock that off!" and fricking pitches his morning cup of coffee across the kitchen, where it explodes on the wall next to Mum's mum. I'm thankful that Larry was not in my mother's life for long. If you're out there, Larry, F you. As a kid, I loved to drink the milk out of the bowl after eating the cereal. One day I stayed over at a friend's house for a sleepover. In the morning I had some cereal and proceeded to drink directly from the bowl as I always had. I was told off and I thought, fine, drinking like that is a little rude, I'll just drink it by using the spoon, like you drink soup. I was told off for that too. I was like, what should I do with this milk? We don't like to waste food at my house, so it gets eaten or in the fridge, and the idea of just pouring it down the sink baffled me. I once got grounded for 2 months because my school bus was late. Backstory. I was 12 years old when this happened. A couple of kids almost got into a fistfight before the school bus left the parking lot, and the bus driver had to get the principal to break it up and escort them back into the school. The bus driver lectured us about fighting before driving us home. This caused us to be 30 minutes late. When I explained this to my mother, she blamed the whole situation on me, which was completely irrational because 1, I barely knew the kids who were involved, and 2, I was an introvert, bookworm type who never got into a fight. Oh, and 3, if I'd been in the fight, I would have been taken to the principal's office for punishment instead of being allowed to ride the bus home. She made a rule that I would be grounded every time the bus was late going forward regardless of the reasoning. I grew up in the northwest part of the US, so even when the bus driver had to drive home slowly because of snow, I would still get punished. Needless to say, I wasn't allowed out of the house much in middle school or high school. I once got grounded because I did the dishes without having to be reminded. My mum said that I was trying to manipulate her and that I must have only done it because I was trying to get something out of her. In reality, all I wanted out of her was to stop yelling at me about how I never do the dishes without having to be reminded. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. If you didn't instantly say what you wanted to eat, my father would cook onions and garlic. He didn't like people wasting his time. My grandmother made me write out the encyclopedia entry on witchcraft when she found out I'd read the first 4 Harry Potter books, if that counts. Oh no, my kid might learn witchcraft. Better have them copy an article on actual witchcraft. I had a stepdad who was a police officer, and all this occurred until I was 15. 1. I had to eat beans first on my plate and then clockwise. If I didn't follow this rule, I'd get no food and kicked from the dinner table. 2. I couldn't listen to Vanilla Ice because it was black music. 3. I had to stand in the corner with both feet on the floor and back straight for hours. 4. I had a time limit on hugging my mother. If we hugged too long, he called me gay slurs. 5. I had to get up in the morning and sit on the toilet and shine his leather while he showered. 6. I couldn't shut the door to go number 2. 7. I couldn't shut the door to shower or bathe. 8. If my bed squeaked at night, I'd get whipped because he thought I was whacking it. Oh yeah, and there were more. I'm a mid-30s straight male and in a professional career. This happened from '84 to 1997 in southern US. This is just the surface stuff. I didn't even mention the stuff I knew was off growing up. He's retired on police pension, living off the state. He never had a single charge formally put in his jacket or his criminal record. Mum was definitely having a rough time of it too. No one in the house was allowed to shave or have a razor at all. I couldn't go to a barber or shave at a friend's house, but had my PC taken away when I tried at home. I still don't understand my mother's logic behind this one. I wasn't allowed to shave my legs. I guess my mom's thinking was that all the hair would serve as boy repellent. It wasn't necessary though, my personality was more than enough to keep me from getting laid. As much as some of the other stuff has surprised me, the repeated rule of no leg shaving across some of these posts is something I didn't even contemplate could happen. Fundamentalist religious people, treat your kids better. Your daughters shouldn't be your prisoners. My dad wrote contracts for me, including clauses like daily wake-up times, bedtimes, times to eat and what I ate, chores, homework, studying, and sports schedules, and strict rules and regulations regarding how I spent my free time, such as 30 minutes of computer use or video games, 1 hour of television, 1 sleepover per month, etc. If I didn't follow my schedule to the dot, missed sports practice or a game, failed to do a chore, or failed to get a 4.0 on every report card, I would be super grounded, as my friends referred to it. Basically, I had to read quietly in my room. I wasn't even allowed outside. I had to sign these contracts and commit to them, or I'd be sent to military school, which is where I spent every summer after 7th grade, taking classes anyways. As a result of these classes, I was a couple of grades ahead with math, English, and science, and was still expected to make perfect marks every semester. I was grounded virtually all the time, but luckily my parents had joint custody, and I escaped to my mother's house as much as possible. Also, mandatory substance testing from age 14 onward. Don't even get me started on what he would have done if he knew how much I smoked. I fought for sole custody to belong to my mother when he finally decided that, having caught me in the act with my girlfriend at the time, he was going to send me to a military academy 4 hours away. Nope, haven't spoken to him in almost 6 years. My dad was raised with the idea that kids essentially have no opinion, which he passed on to my sister and I. If we were doing anything and he or my mum needed us to do something else, we were expected to immediately drop it and go do the other thing, which doesn't sound that bad until I'd be in the middle of painting or something else messy and be called to do the dishes, then in the middle of the dishes be called to clean up the original mess, then to go clean that up and be yelled at for not finishing the dishes. And Lord help me if I said just a minute or anything like that. This sounds like a manager I had. Do tasks A, B, and C. I'll start task A. Why isn't C done yet? Drop A and start C. Why haven't you finished A yet? Go back to A. Wait, what about C? And why haven't you finished B yet? Stupid. Leave me alone and my job would take half the time. They were also fond of, well, why didn't you do X? When I'd tell her the extra tasks I did in downtime. Oh, you vacuumed, dusted, and washed the cabinets? Why didn't you clean the windows? My mom used to not allow me to watch any movies that had magic in them. Jumanji was considered demonic. I didn't even see The Little Mermaid until I was 16. I didn't watch The Princess and the Frog until I'd moved out. I was also banned from reading or watching Harry Potter. I managed to sneak that in at the age of 20. Mom never caught me and Dad didn't care. My dad wouldn't let me go out at all. The only time he'd let me leave the house was to walk to school, and even then, he had to walk me to the entrance. I was teased all the time. Due to my isolated upbringing, I'm very socially awkward, and he wonders why I won't go out and find myself a partner. He never raised my sisters that way, just me. He also wouldn't let me chew gum. He'd flip out. He's physically pried my mouth open to take the gum out. He's such a bizarre, controlling man. My mom didn't allow candy. Once I snagged a box of Valentine Hearts candy from preschool. Yes, I was about 4 or 5 and smuggled them home. Out of the goodness of my heart, I decided to share them with my undeservedly revered older brother. Said brother quickly decided that getting free candy was nowhere near as entertaining as me being punished and humiliated, and told my mom I was eating contraband candy. So, like any reasonable adult would do, she freaked out and pulled a Valentine heart out of my mouth while I was trying to eat it. Moral of the story? Never trust anyone. Could never have my door shut because, as a kid, I don't pay any bills, so I'm not running anything around here. My mum and I didn't get along and she did this count to 3 thing. I used to get in trouble for stuff I didn't do, so I got sent to my room a lot. I'd then refuse to go there, so she came up with this rule where she would add an extra hour every time I talked back after she got to 3. I ended up spending 8 hours in my room once because my sister lied about me doing something. My mum tried something similar with me. She told me I'd be grounded 1 day for every minute late I was home after curfew. It worked a couple of times when I was only a little late. One night I checked the time and was already 20 minutes late, so I just came home at 4:30 a.m. She didn't ground me for 270 days, thankfully. We came to a new, more reasonable agreement that morning. We had to drink a glass of lemon juice right before bed. Pure, freshly squeezed lemon juice. A whole glass. Timer went on for 10 minutes. If it went off and you weren't finished, whack on the butt. Set timer and repeat until the lemon juice was gone. I did okay, maybe 1 whack on the butt. But my sister has a terrible gag reflex, so she really got it bad. As you can imagine, being 5 and going to bed like that makes for some nasty heartburn and nausea. As a medical professional, do you get acid reflux nowadays? How about your siblings? Your parents might have caused GERD, which could lead to throat cancer. This is some pretty serious stuff. Go get your esophagus checked out. Unless your parents are waging some very poorly informed war on scurvy, I can't for the life of me find a reason why this rule would be a thing unless you just like watching your kids suffer, to be honest. After I turned 9 years old, I wasn't allowed to watch cartoons anymore because that's not what men did. I hated my dad for it. He was your typical dad that forces society's standard masculinity down my throat. I definitely rebelled and still watched cartoons. I'm 24 and still enjoy a good cartoon or anime. I was raised religious and my mum invented a concept called micro-sinning. So we had a rule where I had to be home by 11. If I made it home at 10:50, I was punished because it was too close to 11 and I was being defiant. Jesus died for our micro-sins. My parents were all over the place with strictness. When I was old enough to drive, my younger sister and I would drive to McDonald's, just a few miles away. My parents would admonish us, "Whatever you do, do not eat French fries in the car." Invariably, we'd get home, they would run out, open the doors, sniff, and start screaming at us for eating French fries in the car. We never did. When Nintendo, the original, first came out, my cousin got one for Christmas. We were poor, so he brought it over so we could try it out. Nope. The new rule became no video games hooked up to the TV because it would ruin the TV. FYI, they still believe this to be true and still only have one TV. Couldn't watch Disney movies as a child because they showed kissing before marriage. Wasn't allowed to go to friends' houses or let them give me a ride home from school because I'd be imposing on their parents. Mum went through my trash to make sure I didn't throw out anything important. The rule was that my mum had to pick out my friends because she didn't want me hanging out with anyone who wasn't Catholic or who was into satanic content. To my mum, everything was satanic. So basically, just about everyone I brought home was influenced by the devil because their parents let them listen to modern pop music and watch Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z, mid to late 90s. Visiting their homes was strictly forbidden on account of the fact that the only opinions she wanted me to have were hers and hers only. It also didn't help when I wanted to play at the park with my friends and my mum would literally follow us and watch us the entire time. Eventually, no one wanted to be my friend anymore, and that was when the bullying began. This torture went on for 7 years. Then my mum wondered why I didn't have any friends and was bullied for such a long time. It was a miracle that I even had friends when high school came along. Needless to say, I'm not a Catholic anymore, and my mum and I are not on good terms. There was a crap ton of crazy rules living with my parents, mainly from my mum. My dad only followed to avoid arguments. But this rule was the one that affected me the most. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.